Good morning and thank you for joining us this morning at our City Council work session. We'll go ahead and get started. Ruth, could you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Adamson?
Here.
Gray? Cheatham?
Here.
Lurick?
Here.
Johnston?
Here.
Manon? Platt?
Here. Thank you. We'll jump to agenda item number 2 is Housing and Alliance and Community Partnership Update. Representatives from Housing and Alliance and Community Partnership will discuss their goals and projects as well as council's policies and expectations.
Fabulous. Thank you for having us here today, you all. Last year I prepared a PowerPoint. This year I did not, but I did bring you our current annual report for the Housing Authority that does include a lot of the work that has happened in this last year. Last year when I met with you, we had not yet purchased the Elms Apartments, which are 69 beds of student housing over on South 4th, right next door to Big Mill Creek Apartments. We've been excited to be able to acquire that property. It does follow in line with our mission because our mission is to promote self-sufficiency through housing opportunities, and the college does, obviously having students does promote self-sufficiency opportunities. We still have all of our other programs. That lease up is really strong, showing that there's a great need in the city of Pocatello. Our public housing property this year, we put a new roof on that property. This summer it houses 72 seniors. We did have a bit of a challenge with that property just this week in regards to a power outage that went on very, very, very long. Idaho Power is working with us to try and make that right, because they also damaged our elevator system, alarms, and our sprinkler system in that process. But we were able to be on site with our residents until the power came in on late in the night, because it is an elderly disabled property, and so that contractor needs some education in working with special needs populations. But we also have Portneuf Towers, which is 72 units of elderly disabled. McKinley and Maple, which is 100 units of what is called multifamily housing. There's no subsidy attached, but by contract with HUD, it is low rent. We also have many properties that are out on the open market to catch people in that gap of affordable housing and market rate. So our commitment is to make sure that those rents are pretty low for those families who can't yet afford market rate but make too much income to afford a subsidy. We manage properties that are also Section 8 new construction that are based upon income. We have 5 of those. When I first came to Pocatello, we had 266 apartments that we owned, and now we have, counting our student housing, about 375 units owned and or managed. You know that we also have a voucher program, which a lot of the landlords out in the community really like that program because it helps us to funnel federal dollars to them for rental assistance. That helps to make up the difference between what families who are in a lower income bracket could afford for rent. We subsidize that difference. We, as of the end of this annual report, which was June 30th, we had 692 vouchers. We were lucky or blessed, or a combination of both, this year to also be able to apply for 22 additional what are called mainstream vouchers. Those vouchers, that went through an application process that was pretty tight competition, so we were glad to be able to get our hands on those. We hadn't had those in this community previously. Those vouchers will assist 22 households that are non-elderly but have disability and have been homeless. So it's a really unique group that it captures. That money was made available to us November 1st. As of today, we have 9 households out on the street looking for an apartment or home to live in, utilizing that little bucket of funds that we have had made available to us. We are also working with with Aid for Friends for referrals on that, as well as the agency that makes referrals for HMIS here in our community. So that's the agency that is kind of the one-stop shop. It's managed by Aid for Friends, and it is a computer system, and it is the one-stop shop for people who are referred to them who are experiencing homelessness. And so we have notified them that we have these vouchers, and they are working on getting us referrals so we can get these 22 households leased up as quickly as possible. So that takes us up above 700 households now that we assist on the voucher program. Again, 8 years ago compared to that, we were at 560. So we're really excited about that progress that the agency has made. This entire year, our conversations have been centered around the mugs that are in front of you right now. It is our 50th anniversary. So when we came to you last year, we were Housing Authority of the City of Pocatello, and then you will all recall that we came back in February and you agreed to do a name change for us. We are now Housing Alliance and Community Partnerships. We believe that that name more accurately reflects the work that we do. Housing Alliance meaning all of these programs under one umbrella, and community partnerships because we can't do the work that we do without the partnerships that are currently in place. We also think that we were pretty clever in maintaining the same acronym, HACP, so we didn't have to change emails. So there was a lot of thought that went into that because we all know that changing emails is a pain, right? So we have been celebrating our 50th anniversary this entire year. We've done something each month to celebrate that. Thinking of things back, like in February, we partnered with Wilcox Elementary and they made Valentine greeting cards for our elderly and disabled properties. They made 144 Valentine cards. Our maintenance team then delivered those cards along with a carnation to each resident at our elderly and disabled properties. We've held a Mother's Day tea. We've held a Donuts for Dads for Father's Day. We have done, we've hosted business after hours and had a trolley tour that some of you were on so that we could go see all of our properties. And continually trying to talk about the good work that the Housing Authority is doing and elevate our presence in the community utilizing this 50th anniversary opportunity. I want to, in your annual report, call your attention specifically to, and I need to put on my glasses to look at this, pages 8 and 9. Because each year you all say, you know, what can we do to partner with the Housing Authority as well? And it really does pertain to messaging. Jim, who is our liaison, hears this all of the time, as does the mayor, whom I'm always talking about messaging, because you as elected officials have greater opportunity to be tweeting or talking into the ears of other elected officials at the national level. There is some sad information that goes around throughout the country that talks about the laziness of the people that we serve and that are on our programs, and how they really do need to just be able to pick themselves up by the bootstraps. And my argument is always that if you didn't have boots to begin with, that is a little bit of a difficult task. And so I want people to know very clearly that the people who we serve on our program are not lazy. That is a complete stereotype, and I do not believe in stereotypes. So this one on page 8 shows you the demographics that are served by Idaho for federal funds. And when you take a look at that, you can see that we only have 27% that are served in Idaho who really would be able to work if it were not for, because they don't have situations where they're elderly or they're disabled or their households that are elderly, raising children. So our people are working. And that statistic is shown even more down in the first bullet point, where it says 73% of non-elderly, non-disabled households receiving HUD rental assistance in Idaho were working, recently working, or likely were subject to work requirements. So I think that that is a really good fact to use when you hear people talk about these stereotypes that are associated with the populations that we serve. Because I take great offense when people say that the families that I serve are lazy and just mooching off the system. That's not true. And additionally, the people who maybe are not working, we are doing everything that we can to move them into the workplace. We're partnering with the current program that the mayor's put together in regards to the task force to end hunger. We're also working through other programs that we have to get them into the workplace. Some of the people who aren't currently working are going to school, and that's a great benefit in the future to our community as well. The other page, on page 9, just shows you for Bannock County. These are statistics that you can pull off from the internet from organizations that study these. The Urban Institute, they study by county affordability. And currently they say that we have 66 affordable rental units for every 100 households. So that tells you that we have 34 households that do not have access to an affordable rental. I think that that speaks clearly to the need that we have for additional affordable housing, be that through additional vouchers or through buildings. Now, I will tell you, you've heard me speak on occasion about the tax credit program, and I'm certainly not here to slam the tax credit program. It is a means to get housing into a community, and I support it completely. But don't be fooled when you hear about tax credits and affordable housing. Tax credits do not reach the poorest of the poor. You have to have income and decent income to afford a unit there. They will meet people who are at 60% of AMI. They are not going to meet people who are served by Christensen Courts, a public housing property, where you're living on $730 a month in Social Security and are paying 30% of your income towards your rent and utilities. You are not going to find an apartment to rent in a tax credit for $210 a month. You just aren't. So although they are an incredible vehicle to bring affordable housing into our community, do not be fooled into thinking that they are reaching the poorest of the poor. So a lot of communities have kind of been duped into believing that. You are still going to have a population of people who just will not be able to afford to even reach that type of housing. So that's just something I put out there, so when we're talking about affordable housing, it's important to know. The rest of this report talks about the things that we're very proud of that have happened in the Housing Authority in the last 12 months ending June 30th. Going forward, we are continually looking to add property to our portfolio. People ask me why we're looking to do that. Quite frankly, I think that federal funds are going to be more and more diminished. And I think that as an agency, we need to look at being able to be more self-sustaining, as well as programs that we do not currently have at the agency. We need to find ways to be able to bring those programs here. For example, there's a program that is HUD funded that's the Family Self-Sufficiency Program that puts money into savings account for people as they build on their work experience and ability. And that program has not been opened up for new applicants in the 8 years that I've been here, and I don't anticipate that it will be. It is a critical program that helps people attain self-sufficiency and home ownership. We should have that program here in Pocatello. I'm working to be able to fund that in our own agency through properties that we're bringing on that are market rate properties, so that we will be able to use the revenue from those properties to keep in-house to create programs that will create self-sufficiency opportunities for the families that we serve, as well as meeting other needs that we see within the community. So that is why we're looking to add additional properties to our portfolio. We've added one, we are working to close on a second, and within the next 3 years I hope to add 2 more, rather that's through building or purchasing. That is going to protect the long-term sustainability of the agency, as well as provide other opportunities for us to develop programs that are not federally funded, but are instead funded in-house. So with that, I'm glad to entertain any questions, or yes, I can always count on Jim to ask questions.
Sunny, I'm so impressed with all that you do. Would you brag for a minute about your leadership responsibility with National Housing? And would you also tell the group about what successes you've had in putting books in the hands of the children in these residences?
Absolutely, thank you. So he's referring to, I think that I did share with you last year, it does sometimes make me a little more uncomfortable to talk about myself directly, but last year, 2 years ago, I went through a campaign for a position at the national level, the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. It's a 19,000 member organization of people who do what I do, and I was successful in that campaign and was elected to the position of Senior Vice President for that organization. In that position, I've been serving for 1.5 years now. In that time, it's opened amazing opportunity. I've been able to work more closely with Senator Crapo's office. I helped to draft the language that was in Senate Bill 2155 in regards to affordable housing and small agency reform. So I worked really closely with them for about 3 weeks, and it was over the holidays and on weekends in making sure that the language would be acceptable. I learned a lot about the political process, and that there were some things that were give and take. There were things that I wasn't necessarily happy with in there, but I was excited to get at least small housing authority regulation out on the books, and we can expand from that. I was also able to assist them, Senator Crapo's office. They called me about 2 months ago that the VAWA legislation, it's Violence Against Women Act, that all landlords and housing authorities are subject to. They wanted my input on some proposed amendments to the renewal of that law and how housing authorities would feel about those amendments. They were very detrimental to housing authorities, as well as what I would believe to landlords. And so I provided that feedback, and they said immediately that they would not be supporting those amendments, and they were able to pass a clean bill without those amendments based on that feedback. So that position has really been able to open a lot of opportunities. My board feels like it's really done a lot to put Pocatello on the map in regards to just housing in general. I think that they think that on the day that I ever decide to leave here that they'll find a housing giant because of the national spotlight that now Pocatello has gotten to come in and take my place, and I think that that would be just a beautiful opportunity for Pocatello as well. I think that, so now what's happened as a result of that senior VP, now I'm campaigning again to be the president of that organization. They're only 2-year terms. I have some really ambitious goals for those 2 years. I plan to work to unite. Housing authorities are under what is called the PIH portion of HUD, Public and Indian Housing. Although public housing and Indian housing rarely have connection, I'm working to strengthen that connection between public and Indian housing because I think the voices will be stronger. I'm also working in conjunction with Mayor Glad, who graciously last year attended our national conference for the legislative conference. So he spent the entire time at our conference, attended all of our plenary sessions, learned a lot about housing. I think that he was like, wow, I had no idea. And then he went to the Hill with us, with the people from Idaho in regards to advocate for housing. And the way that he advocated for us was so incredibly gracious. When he, of course, he got the handshakes and the, oh my goodness, the mayor is here from the elected officials. But the way he approached it was he said, I'm here because I want you to know that housing is important in my community. And we are putting a stake in the ground into how much the funding can be cut and what we expect from the federal government in regards to housing. Although I have come with the professionals in this field and I want you to hear what they say. And so with that, just with that opening, he elevated us all of us who are from Idaho, and there's a picture of all of us that went to a platform where we were really heard, I believe, even more loudly. So he has a great interest, as do I. He made a comment in passing, and I was like, that's powerful, in creating an opportunity for mayors to come to DC at that annual meeting and have an opportunity to learn about housing, attend like a half-day session about learning our language and what our programs are and what they mean to your communities, and then to give the opportunity for mayors to go to the Hill with what we call housers to do that. So we're hoping that this April at that meeting that we'll roll that out on a small level and get some mayors to come in, and then in my term we're really hoping to grow that to the extent that more mayors and even from larger cities come. Because we recognize that, when I'm up on the Hill speaking, that people believe that, maybe this isn't so much in my heart like it is, and it's tied more to my pocketbook and my paycheck. But when you as an elected official takes the time to say, this matters, and I'm gonna be relentless about it, that carries more weight. And so I really appreciate and thank the mayor and the city for allowing him to go with us, because I know his time is valuable. Then in regards to the books, there is a picture in here. We received a merit award, and then we also received one of only 33 awards of excellence for good works in housing authorities. You need to keep in mind there are 3,300 housing authorities, and only 33 of these were given out last year, and that one is for our Book for Every Child initiative. We started out with just getting books at yard sales and people bringing in books and giving us books, and we still do that. But since then, we've been able to partner with a national group, the Book Rich Environments Group, who partners libraries and housing authorities together. And we actually this year got almost 4,000 free books, brand new books who are from different publishers. And we work to get those books into the hands of our children. Studies show that 60% of children living in poverty don't have a book. And the reason for that is because it's not because they've got such incredibly neglectful parents. They do not. It's because when parents get that tax return or it's Christmas time, there's so much pressure to buy the game, you know, the new Game Boy or the Nintendo. I don't know what it is in this generation now, so you have to forgive me. But to buy the new game or the cool new sneakers. And so there's a lot of pressure for that and not for a book. So we get books into the homes of our children. And some people say, well, what if they don't read them? I don't care. They've got a book. What if they color through them? Awesome, they opened it. That's even better, right? But at some point, they're going to read that book because it's available. So we give books all the time. A family comes in and they're just asking questions. If there's a child, books go home with them that are age appropriate. And oftentimes, we take the child back and let them choose their book. When we are doing recertifications, any child, even if they're not with them, listed on an application or on their form, books go home with them. They go out the door. If we're doing inspections, we take books. They go out the door. At our events, books go out the door. We just hosted Trunk or Treat at 4 different properties, and we created little bags for the children that had a little bit of candy, a couple games, and age-appropriate books because we're getting books out the door. We partner with the library, and our team members went this summer and read once a week during the summer lunch program, and they read to the children and then gave out books. And so we really believe that the way to break the cycle of poverty is through education, and that can be technical education or a 4-year degree or even more. But we really believe it starts with education, and we are committed to breaking that cycle because we know we won't go out of business. When I look at the people we serve, you saw the statistics. There's elderly and disabled, and there are more of those who are on our waiting list. So if we get our families moving out and breaking that cycle of poverty, we'll still be around, and we're good with that. So that I think answers your question.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
On page 9, where you talk about extremely low income renter households,
Yes, sir.
you say the area, is that Bannock County? It says Bannock County in the ribbon up above.
Yes.
And so we have 3,740 households that qualify in this gap.
Yes.
So that's like 14,000 people of our 80,000 residents in Bannock County.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah, that is true. And that's why when I say that we really need to be at some point looking at affordable housing. You know, and I don't care who develops it or who's part of it. I don't, you know, it doesn't have to be us in the spotlight, but that's a critical issue.
And we're 2,600 or 2,461
Gap.
affordable units short of
Yep.
taking care of those families.
Yes, that's the gap. Yeah. And Urban Institute, if you ever have any questions about stuff, Urban Institute is really good to go to, as well as I believe I cited my information over here. I think that this also came from Urban Institute. There's somebody that I go to a lot just to get data from in regards to the numbers for our community, because it really speaks to you specifically. You know, this area is growing, which is a beautiful thing. When it's growing, though, and people believe there's opportunity, you're going to see more people moving in. You're also going to see residents who are here that fall between the cracks. People come where they believe there's going to be opportunity, but sometimes they don't have the skill set needed for that opportunity.
When you think in terms of what your mission is, do you really think that an expansion of your mission role would be to get those 2,461?
Yes.
And is that really possible?
Long term. You know, you have to look at, like, some of these people that we have that are in need are going to be people, we have a large population of women who are recently released from incarceration and are trying to reunify with their families. You know, if a landlord is doing due diligence and screening, a lot of times then, just based on that incarceration, they are going to be denied for housing opportunity. I think that there's a need there, and I know that there are other organizations, and if they beat me to it, God bless them, that are looking at that issue. But I would love for us to be able to build 12 to 15 units that are just for women who are trying to reunite with their children, that provides them with wraparound services, that provides them with the with resume building skills, with family counseling, with child counseling, all of these things that they would need then to move out within a couple of years and be successful on their own. So I think that we could. The number will continue to grow, but I'm hopeful. And I know that there are a lot of good people in this community that do housing as well. So like I said, it doesn't have to be me. It can be somebody else that's doing it, and tax credits are going to meet some of this need. So when you're talking about, City Councilman, when you're talking about that gap, tax credits are going to meet some of that need. because some of those people just can't afford full market rate. I'm not saying that everybody needs the public housing or the voucher. Some of them just can't afford full market rate, and tax credits are going to fill that. So that's something really good for the city council to be looking at, is also tax credits in the community. Housing authorities, sadly, are pretty much locked out of that game based upon the application process. You have to be a proven developer and proven experience in doing it. So there are only about 5 or 6 developers in Idaho that can get a tax credit application accepted. In most states, housing authorities are not locked out of that game, and they are developing tax credits, but we are in Idaho. I've talked with some developers that would like to bring lawsuit against the state for that, but nobody really wants to be the ugly stepchild that then the state won't work with. You spend a lot of money on the lawsuit, but then you're never going to get an award for it. So.
Now, the headlines are that we need 300 houses for the FBI people coming in.
Right.
What do we do to get the headline saying we need to take care of this population?
I need your voice. Because my voice is people, my job is tied to it. And granted, that's truth. But it's not just my 9 to 5. It's what I eat, breathe, and sleep. But it's my paycheck. I need your voice. I need you guys to call, awareness to, and you see it. It's not just me. You see it. You see the people out on the street. You see the people at your churches. You see the people who are in great need. It's not, I'm glad to do anything. If the media wants to come and report on it, I'll talk about it all day long. You know that, Jim. But it really has to be made, the community needs to be aware that it is an issue, that there are people who are making decisions between their medication and their rent, or their heat and their rent. And that's a civil society does not require that as a choice.
You have this bully pulpit. What would you like us to do?
I would love for you to, continue talking to elected officials. I will say that I thought that this last year, the budget that was presented to us, I was pleased. One of the things that's interesting, our housing choice voucher budget, which is the 700 households that we assist out in the community, they've been really consistent in funding that. Where they cut back is in the admin fee, so that I cut my staff, and in the past I always said it was really smart. It was a smart way to cut the program, right? Because if I don't have the staff ability to fill the program, then the program goes unfilled. And then I think that federally they can say, these dollars aren't being used, so clearly they're not needed. Well, I have to be able to have staff that can do that work. So that's one of the areas. I would say continue to be relentless. We did have a proposed budget, that came from the White House that was really, really bad for us, and our Congress stood up and said no more. Congress is actually starting to take a look at this. If you look at what happened just Tuesday night, all of the things across the country that were on ballots that were in regards to housing, I think that in the next presidential election it will be a topic. 2 years ago it wasn't. Nobody was talking about affordable housing, and it's because community leaders weren't raising it up. And community leaders are the ones that need to be saying, this is an issue in our community and in our state, and then it will be something that is being talked about. We have a great ally in Senator Crapo, amazing ally in him. He hears us, then he acts. And so I think that right now we have a Senate that is saying there can be no more cuts to these programs. And I'm grateful for that. I would request that you say to them the same thing. No more cuts. No more cuts. I'm not saying, give me the moon. I'm just saying no more cuts. Our families that we serve, where are they going to go? That's right behind the alley here across the road. That's a mom. That's a grandma. That's a dad. I say that's somebody's mother who believed that, she didn't work her whole life. And she believed that if she was just a good wife and a good mom, she'd be okay. And now she's living on $700 a month. And how are you okay on $700 a month? Those are the stories that need to be amplified. So I would just say, please, open your mouth. Open your mouth. Recognize that it's an issue. Use your platform to carry this issue. It doesn't have to be all you talk about. You've got so many other things to talk about in the city, but include it. Please just include it. That would be my request.
Sonny, if we extrapolate, Pocatello has about 65 to 70% of the residents in Bannock County.
Yeah.
So are most of the people then in Bannock County that, and I assume this ELI is extremely low income?
Yes, it is.
So 65 to 70% of those 14,000 people are right here in the city, or more,
Yes.
because the big cities often receive a larger share than the outlying areas because there are
Right.
there are services they can go, and I'm going to say beg for, because that's what a lot of people
what
are
it is.
down to. They're begging for attention to get their kids taken care of. And these are families of 4.
Yeah.
This isn't the full picture, because you're talking just of families of 4 here. There are families of 1, families of 5 or 6, but this is just an average, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah, these are just average numbers that are thrown out. Yes. And I would agree that the bulk are Pocatello and Chubbuck. There's great poverty in some of the outlier areas, but you are absolutely correct, because the services are here. And so when you're lacking transportation, you're going to live in the community where the services are available. So they are here. And I'll share with you, I mean, Pocatello does have amazing services available, just not enough, but amazing. Because with our VASH program, which is our homeless veterans program, we had people who were serving in Idaho Falls, and Cy Williams, who is our VA coordinator, he would say, you don't have services here. Idaho Falls, and I think that they think they're a crown jewel, right? But Idaho Falls, we were saying, you need to move to Pocatello. You really do. We can help you with your housing. We can plug you into other veteran services, because Pocatello is a kind community. Pocatello is a community that wants to help. I think that we just need to figure out a way to help more. But the services are here.
What's the long-term trend?
I am concerned that the number, I think that people who are in housing are going to continue to put a dent in it. But as the city grows and we become more on the map for opportunity, I think that percentage-wise, it may remain the same if we aren't really strategic and aggressive. And if housers in the area weren't as concerned, I think it would grow astronomically.
Out of the historical trend?
Oh, the historical trend, it's actually, I believe, getting worse from what I've seen. The homeless population has gotten worse. You know, we have a homeless preference, and we can't house all the people that are on our homeless list, their preference. They're verified homeless. I had no idea that would happen when we created that preference. I thought that we would have, 5 people at a time on that list. That list has 35 to 45 at a time. One of the households that we just got out and issued a voucher for that mainstream a veteran, young veteran, his girlfriend, they have a 3-year-old child living in a car right now. And so I believe that the trend has gotten worse just in the 8 years that I've been here. I think that we've seen some great jobs come in, FBI coming in, that's a great job. They are not going to employ this population. So, we need to be thinking of how we give this population the skill set so they can compete for some of those. Maybe they won't be an FBI technician, but maybe there's a job at the FBI. I mean, they have to have their bathrooms cleaned, and that's not going to pay too bad. So how do we work to elevate these populations into those positions?
So do you find that people who are, I'm going to call them economically distressed,
Yes.
will they follow HOPE?
Yep.
And if Pocatello says it's growing, and Pocatello says our low employment rate is there, they come here because they hope that they can access a job and kind of better themselves.
They follow HOPE. You look at some of the publicity that Boise received in the last decade for their growth, beautiful community to live in, opportunity, hope, and then what has happened with their homeless population in Boise. It has gone off the charts. To the point where the city council is now working with different agencies to create a transitional housing shelter. So you're exactly right, the trend is going to continue because of that. Pocatello does great. Pocatello is a beautiful place to live, and they are going to follow that hope as it continues to grow.
How much of your resources are in other communities?
Our boundary is entirely Pocatello and 5 miles. So we can go into Chubbuck, but only within 5 miles of the city limit. If I had to say specifically, our resources are 95% in Pocatello, because every property that we own is in Pocatello, and the bulk of our voucher program is in Pocatello. The only other location they're at is in Chubbuck. And that's something.
You mentioned Idaho Falls.
I mentioned Idaho Falls because we had a VASH program where they did not have the VASH, the homeless veterans. We have 33 vouchers for that. So HUD requires that if somebody wants to move to an agency, then we have to help with that, and then we bill that agency. So whatever their HAP is, they have to we bill them for that. But recently, Idaho Falls was successful in getting some of their own VASH vouchers, which we advocated for because we believe we have enough need here for homeless veterans. So they got their own VASH vouchers, and we were able to pull ours back. So they're 100% here. And at that time, there were 7. When they finally got their vouchers, they absorbed 7 of our participants into their program.
Good. Other questions? Thank you, Sunny. You're doing an incredible job. Thank you.
Thank you. I will share just one thing, and I'm sorry because I do realize that they are on your agenda, but we really struggled this year in completing a salary study. HUD requires us to do a salary study every 5 years, and we really do need the help of the city with that. That is actually subject to FOIA, I believe, and we made 3 requests and were unable to get. I don't need the names of people tied to those positions, but there are certain positions that we need information on to make sure that we're paying people what the jobs pay here, not what they pay in South Dakota or North Dakota, but here. And so we really struggled with our salary study on that, and we do try to partner with the city in any way. We'd like to see sometimes that partnership reciprocated in those ways. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Sunny, can I get another one?
Absolutely.
Missing this middle section.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 3, Security Systems Presentation for City Government Access. Information Technology IT staff will give a presentation regarding a system to change facility access from door locks to a badge entry system for City Hall and the Pocatello Police Department. The proposed system will improve physical security at the facility. The same system will also be used to access City Department computers and improve cybersecurity for the city system and data. IT staff is seeking council's guidance or direction as to whether staff should continue to pursue the proposed system. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Council, I'm Chris Sorensen, the Chief Information Officer for the city. Coming up on my 4th year anniversary, time flies extremely quick around here. When I came here, one of my strategic initiatives was to improve the overall security of our resources here in the city, primarily cyber resources, but also with a little bit of history in my past, physical security as well. It scares me when I come into this building and we have absolutely zero security to keep people out that shouldn't be here. In my previous life, I was responsible for many exercises where we exercised active fire drills, active shooter drills, those kind of things, and looking at the risks, looking at the vulnerabilities, looking at the threats, and figuring out ways to take care of those to protect our people. My big background, of course, in my prior life was IT and IT security. And when I got here, there was almost no IT security in place, and we have made great strides at resolving some of the issues that I found here. The threat is ever changing. The threat can be anything from an insider doing damage to our networks to cyber criminals attacking our networks, malware coming into the system, students just trying to prove a point that they can get into the system, activists hacking websites, defacing the websites, doing denial of service on your networks, and those kind of things. Those threats are not going to decrease. They're going to continue to increase over time. And it's tough staying ahead of those threats. And what you need to do is you need to look at your vulnerabilities, where your holes are, and you need to find ways to close those holes and close those vulnerabilities in order to reduce your overall risk. We've closed a lot of those vulnerabilities. The number one vulnerability to any cyber system is the users. And we have done great and extensive strides in training our individuals what to look out for, what to click on, what not to click on. And as we have addressed that vulnerability of the user, we have been able to reduce some of our risks. We still have attacks. We probably close the door on 50,000 or more attacks every day on our using our firewalls, our intrusion detection systems. But we continue to see stuff. We have a monitoring system that we put on our network, the MSISAC, the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. They actually monitor our networks for us, and they look at stuff that's coming in and what's going out. And it's amazing how we still see stuff that's getting through and finding its way into our network. Shortly after I got here, we were hit with some malware because of our backups, because of the security practices that we had already put in place. We were able to minimize the damage of that one. We had an attack on one of our servers the other day, encrypted all the files, and within 24 hours we were 100% back up and running. We lost no data, no personal information was lost. All they did was come in and encrypt the files and stuff, just a nuisance attack. But again, because we had strong backups and we had the capability and we were a little bit aware of the risk out there, and our association with the MSISAC and some guidance and direction they gave us, we were able to overcome that. But one of the vulnerabilities we still have here in our network systems is we use a single authentication into our network, and that's the password. Passwords are one of your weakest links coming into a network, and most of you have probably experienced in your personal use that many of your websites that you go to and stuff are instituting what they call two-factor authentication, where once you log in, they send you a text message with a code that you then turn around and type in, and then it allows you into the network or into the system that you're trying to get into. That's called two-factor authentication. It's something you know, it was your user logon, and then something that you possess, and that's the code that they sent you. But we want to look at something that will bring two-factor authentication into our network. Usually it's the different factors are either something you own, something you know, or something about you. When you're talking about something about you, it's usually biometrics, it's fingerprints, it's retinal scans and stuff. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources to do that. We do have, hopefully, the capability to be something you know, which is your password, or a PIN, and something you possess or own, which will be a badge. Those badges now have chips on them. If you look at most of your current credit cards, there's a chip on it. That same chip is has been used for logging onto networks for probably 20 years now in other agencies. The DoD has used it extensively for at least 20 years. Some of those chips you don't see, they're embedded in the cards. They're contactless, so you just wave it. A lot of times you'll see those type of systems in hospitals, where when you walk into the room, the nurse or the doctor waves their card in front of the computer and it logs them on. And as soon as they walk out of the room, if they fail to log off, the computer will sense that that card is no longer in its presence and the system will log off or shut down so the person doesn't have access. So what we want to do today is talk about a proposal that will address that logical access control. How do you get into the network? How do you increase the security, reduce the vulnerabilities, and reduce your overall risk? And while we're doing that, we're going to tie it into another project which we've talked about in the past a little bit, and that's improving the security of this building to start with the potential to take and expand that security to other facilities. One of those facilities is the new streets facility. In fact, one of the bids we have received, it's not really a bid, I just asked for some cost estimates, and it's the company that's actually putting in the locks and the security for the new building where streets and sanitation will be going into. So he would be a good contractor to work with because he'd be kind of bringing in the same systems. Well, the thing you can do with this is the same card that you use to access your computer will be the same card you'll use to come into the building. It'll use the same PIN, it'll use the same technology, and it will improve that security, that physical security in this building for those of us that reside in this building and on the police side. That's where this proposal is going to talk about initially. And again, it can be extended. So we're going to talk about this proposal. The goals are to improve the overall security for city personnel, our physical and our data resources. It will provide a badging system to secure the access to City Hall, the police department, and to help identify employees. And it will be expandable to other systems. Again, it will provide that multi-factor authentication that we've been talking about, having two-way or requiring two authentication points to get into the network. And the goal will be to utilize the same technology for both. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a singular system utilizing the smart card technology to provide access to both the facilities and the networks. And again, these smart cards are the size of ID cards, the size of a credit card essentially. We'll have the picture of the individual on it. It will be programmed via device where it will be plugged into the device. The information necessary for that individual will be put on that card so that when that person presents that card either to the network system or to a door lock, it will identify that person. That person will then turn around and most likely input a PIN that will then grant them access into either the facility or the network. Again, these cards can be either contactless or contact. The contact ones, you can physically see the chip on them. They actually require inserting them into a device that will read that chip. The contactless ones, again, are ones that you just simply wave in front of it. It has an RFID type chip in it, and it will recognize it when it's in the vicinity of the machine. These cards can use what they call public key infrastructure encryption. That greatly increases the security of the system. It also greatly increases the cost of the system. But if you're going to go with this system, that is where I would like to see us go, is using the PKI encryption on it. And you can set these cards up to be used with or without a PIN. Again, in order to do multi-factor authentication, they will need to have the PIN on them. Otherwise, anybody who has access to that card could then access the building and stuff. So it's kind of foolish not to include the PIN piece of it, because then if you lose the card, somebody then has access to the building until you turn that card off in the system. We have physical locks on a lot of our doors. A lot of the doors, both here on the police side and on the city hall side, currently use pin pads to get into the door. They don't have a card. Those pin pads are limited in distribution throughout the building. The main doors don't have them on. They are on the doors that access the other parts. Once you come into City Hall and into the foyer there are those doors. Most of those doors are left unlocked during the day though, to enable access for visitors. That is one drawback to this system. It will reduce the ability of a visitor just simply to walk in. They will have to contact somebody. Somebody will have to come to a door and allow them into the building. Again, you don't get into a lot of public facilities nowadays without some type of security in place. Try to get into one of the courthouses, one of the county buildings, a hospital, and many other places without the proper ID, and you won't make it very far. And the system will also, again, allow network access via an attached USB reader. In order for the network to see the card and recognize the card, you're going to have to put some type of a device on the network, on each PC. That's the low-cost piece of the deal. They're usually $5 to $15 a piece. They don't cost a whole lot of money. In the future, as we buy keyboards, you can actually buy the keyboards with the readers built right into the keyboard. But that would take time to transition out all our keyboards, and we would recommend you go simply with the card reader attached to the computers. So physical access to the building, let's talk about that for just a minute. If we're looking at City Hall and the police side of the building, that's what we're talking about to start with. That's where the majority of our employees are. That's where the majority of our employees come and go frequently, and it's really where the majority of our visitors come and go on a regular basis. We have up to other 17 possible locations we could address with this system down the road. Everything from the fire departments to the library to the water facility, WPC, and all those other places. And again, as I mentioned, the new street sanitation fleet building is receiving this technology already as they're building that building. We've gone out twice for quotes on this. The first quote was done about a year ago. It pretty much only addressed the buildings the doors that currently have cipher locks on them, the pin pads on them. And it was looking at issuing fobs to everybody in the building, kind of a key fob, and you would just either wave it or insert it into the door. So I have that quote that I'll present to you. I went out about 4 months ago and reevaluated the building. In addition to the existing 20 pin pads that are attached to doors throughout this building, I saw an additional 22 doors that I thought needed to have the locks put on them. We also have a requirement for anti-passback locks on at least 4 doors. These are doors that would require you to log in when you go into the room and log out going out of the room. Mostly, those doors are primarily our evidence room over here on the police side. And we have 2 vehicle access gates in the back that this system would have to also address for us. So the cost estimate, that first estimate that was done over a year ago with the initial 20 doors and the key fobs came in at about $50,000 is what the cost estimate was. Couldn't get any excitement about that, couldn't get any drive or initiative to get moving forward on that, so that project kind of died. When I went out to get some initial quotes for this project with the expanded additional 20 or 22 doors, came in at about $95,000. Again, a reminder that these quotes that I have here, when I went to these companies, I said I just need budgetary estimates. These aren't firm quotes by any means. These are estimates that the professionals gave me that they thought, based on these requirements that I laid down for them, what they think they could come in and do the project for. They were also done kind of isolated from each other, the building piece and the logical access into the network piece. If these projects are brought together, there will be some cost savings because there are some cost estimates that were built into each of these rough estimates that in reality would only have to be done once instead of the two different times that were in these quotes. So we're looking at $95,000 to increase the physical security of this building, to reduce the threat of a disgruntled employee coming back into the building after they've been fired, having a disgruntled citizen coming in and taking out their frustration on employees that are in the building. Okay, let's jump from that physical access piece to the logical access. Again, we're talking smart card with PIN access into all city systems. So when you come to work, you're going to have that ID badge with you. You're going to need it to get into the network. And you're going to need that PIN. Again, I strongly recommend the public key infrastructure capability. It encrypts everything on that card, so if somebody gets that card, one, they can't decode it or take any information off of that card. Plus, it ensures that as that card is talking to our network, everything is encrypted as it's going back and forth. Another piece that you can add on to this capability of using the card is creating a single sign-on option. Don't recommend that at this time. It greatly increases the cost. Simplifies it for the user. He logs into his network and he gets access to everything, all the different systems that he needs access to. It gets them into our Naviline system, our Superion system, gets you into your email system, gets you into the Veritas, gets you into the Lucity, gets you into the GIS system. You don't have to remember all your different PINs and passwords for that. It does greatly increase the cost if you go do that. It does increase your security, simplifies it for the users. But in these cost estimates that were given to us, it greatly increased the price. So I'm not sure we get the return on the investment by going to single sign-on. We may have some options to help resolve some of our single sign-on requirements, though. Our new app that we are currently developing for our citizen requests and the overall app for the city, there was a piece of that project that included single sign-on, and we're still researching to see exactly what that's going to bring, but I don't think it's going to bring everything that a true single sign-on would bring to us. So again, you would use the card and the PIN for two-factor authentication. It would greatly increase our security on the network, and it would eliminate not only a need for an individual to always remember their password, but right now we have everybody reset their password every 6 months. And unfortunately, I don't think most people are using really strong passwords. We do require that you use a capital case letter, a lowercase letter, at least 8 characters, and a special case letter. Most people are still using very simple terms, and when we have gone out and had people doing an analysis on our network and on the passwords on our network, while it didn't associate the password with the individuals, it can pull and tell me what all the different passwords are, and it's amazing how many of them would be very easy for somebody to guess. And they use very sequential, they reset it, sometimes they only change 1 or 2 characters, and it becomes very easy for somebody to, once they find that password, they could be into our network. We will need to have a procedure in place when people lose their cards or come to work and they forgot their cards. In those cases, a password, temporary password, will have to be used. But trust me, from experience of forgetting my card in the past and getting to work and not having it, you only forget it once or twice. In most military installations, you don't get on the base without that card. And if you've driven 15, 20 miles to work and you go in the gate and all of a sudden you reach in your wallet or your pocket and you don't have that card, and you realize you're going to have to go back home to get it, you only forget it once or twice. So it doesn't happen very often. Once people get used to having their cards with them, they will not forget them, generally speaking, overall, so it's not too big of an issue. Okay, so what are the costs? 1 million to 2 million. $1 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 if we want to bring in a logical access system with a simple card that doesn't do anything much more than allow the user to log on, no encryption on the card, no single sign-on, we're talking about $42,000. Now, this would be for every employee in the city. Now, while the badge access into the building may only require those that come into the building frequently and that we currently give PIN numbers to or have keys to this building, these badges will go to everybody in the city that has either a requirement to be in the building or a requirement to be on our network. Again, the low-end cost is about $42,000. It doesn't bring all the security I think you need, but it's a good starting point. The system that I would recommend would be about $90,000 because it brings in that encryption capability for the card, protects the user a little bit more, does not have single sign-on capability, and it does have an annual maintenance of about $7,500. When I said single sign-on adds a cost, you can see what it adds. It adds a significant cost, $175,000 with the PKI and the single sign-on. I don't recommend that one at this time. So if we were to go forward with this project, this is a kind of a cost summary. If you go just with the physical access piece of it, you're looking at $95,000. If you add one of the logical access control pieces, you're adding anywhere between $42,000 and $175,000 to that project. So the total project cost range is anywhere from $42,000 to $270,000, depending on which pieces you pick. That's not only the installation, it's also the first year maintenance in that cost estimate. So with those numbers, I need some guidance. Does the city want to improve our overall security with new physical and logical access controls? That's the first question. The next question is which elements of access control would you like us to pursue with this project if you want us to pursue it? And then we need to come up with a funding source. This would well fall within the guidelines of capital improvement. So you have those capital improvement funds that are at your disposal every year, or we could draw this out and get it into next year's budget as we continue to go forward with it. And this price range and the size of this project is going to have to go out as a formal request for proposal out to contractors. I just went with a couple that I knew about in my past life and some research I did, and those contractors were kind enough to actually spend quite a bit of time to give me those rough budgetary estimates. But I've told both of those contractors that helped me there that there's no guarantee they'll get it because it will have to go out for bid. So, guidance. Questions, please?
Ask a question. So of course I'm all about protecting our employees. I'm concerned about their safety, but I'm also a little concerned about the physical access, blocking access to the public. So how much are we talking about? How difficult will it be for people to get in and out of the building? I mean, we see just sitting here today how many people are going in and out. How much of a hindrance is it going to be for people to come in and do their daily business?
It will
City
increase
Hall?
it a little bit for them. It'll also increase a little bit of expense to the employees, giving up their time to go answer doors and bring people in. Obviously, you're going to have like this lobby open because that's how they're going to come in and pay their bills. This room will be open because it's a public access room. The doors, the locks on that door, the locks on that door would have to be enhanced. The locks that would go on the main doors would be like on a timer, that they would go on and off. Another part of the system is if, again, you have doors that you have put on a timer and they're open during certain times, if you do have an incident, you can have somebody go on the system and immediately throw the doors into lockdown mode and lock down those doors. Almost all the doors that we have in this building, the access would be single directional. So you would need a card to come in, but not a card to go out, again, except for those 4 doors that we identified over on the police side that would require going in and out with the card. Again, primarily the evidence rooms where you need to ensure you know who's been in there and who's left there. So yeah, you'll increase the difficulty a little bit for the citizens when they want to come in. We may have to like put a phone at the door, and so they can call whoever they're there to visit. But again, we shouldn't have people who aren't expected just coming in and walking around the building and facility. And today, we don't even have ID badges that are utilized by everyone, except for the police have significantly changed their policy. on their side of the building, where they're just using a dumb ID card, but at least when they see somebody walking in the hall, they know whether that person should be in that hallway or shouldn't be, based on them either having a badge or having somebody escort them into the area.
So whose job will it be to let people in?
If somebody's coming
The
to see
department
you,
they're
it's your
calling, or-
job to let them in.
What if they don't know who they're coming to see?
Then we used to have an informational desk that would have been the person to address it. That person was there as this was being kind of put together. So that's a question that would have to be addressed.
And would council members and mayor have these?
You would all have cards, of
Cards.
course, with the physical access into the building. They wouldn't be designed necessarily to have physical access to our networks, because right now you don't have access to our networks. I don't believe any of you have accounts on our networks, so. Other questions?
Several parts of the building have no physical restraints on them. Accounting, mayor's office, those areas. Are we going to build walls?
No, where you would control them at is in the main,
That lobby.
with your main doors going into the building. So the main control for the city hall doors would be these doors right over here. Again, you would have this area open because of the requirement to have public general access into here for meetings, as well as for them to come into their, to pay their utility bills. You would continue to have locks on this door. There are no locks on this door on this side. This door would probably have to go to a two-way lock on that. We might have to address it with fire department for egress in case of fire or something on this door. We looked at the locks on all the outside perimeter doors. We've also looked at locks that control access into, once you get through these doors, getting into the engineering side, the legal side, the IT side, we have some additional locks that we would require, and others. And again, a lot of the numbers and the locks I looked at were single-sided, me walking through the building and saying, I think you would need a lock on this door. We need to do a little more formal analysis to find out exactly which doors we want to put those on. And in addition to that, kind of as a complete side note, one thing I did learn as I was doing this is we don't have very good drawings of this building on this side or the police side. This side, the drawings are somewhat current. The police side, we don't have current drawings, and I think it would behoove the city to have somebody do an actual floor plan of this building and have it drawn out a little bit better than what I was able to find access to. Again, that's a side note, but maybe we need to do that as we're looking at rebuilding and as we're redesigning the engineering and planning part of the building, and we're remodeling that. Maybe whoever does that project, we ought to throw in something, because we do not have very good drawings, especially of the police side of the building.
I had a comment along the lines that you were asking. We have a lot of public open meetings that are held back in the Iwamizawa or Paradise conference rooms. So if we had everything on lockdown, that could potentially cause us some issues with access for the public.
And when you have a meeting like that, you may want to have somebody at the door to greet everybody that's coming in to the meeting. And again, just because they have a meeting in there doesn't mean they're entitled to continue to walk around the building and do it. Those people really should, if they're visitors to the building, they really should either be escorted, well, they really should be escorted. If they're not a regular employee of the city, they really should be escorted when they're inside the city facilities to protect the individuals and protect the resources. While we ask everybody to log off of their computers when they walk away, while we have a 15-minute timer on the lockout, if somebody is walking around, I can guarantee I can walk around at any given time of day. I can sit down at anybody's computer and have full access to the network because somebody has walked away, left their machine logged on, or they haven't been gone long enough for the system to lock down. Well, if you have somebody in a meeting visiting that has ulterior motives and they walk around and they find a desk and that computer's on, they can have access to whatever they want to have access to.
What about members of volunteer committees or appointed persons?
That would be probably something that would have to be addressed. Again, those people shouldn't have access to our networks. Some do. We've been addressing that recently, in fact, because we have found some volunteers that have come back and have had access to our networks, and they really shouldn't, because we have no recourse if they come into the network and they do something inadvertently. So another question that would probably have to be addressed.
I think what Heidi's getting at is a lot of our advisory committee meetings and boards are not, they're public meetings, and even our council meetings are public meetings, but they're not in here, they're in the
And some of
conference
them are
room.
after hours.
And they're after hours, they're during the day, but they're open meetings that people, you know, and you say they'd be escorted in, but people are supposed to be able to come and go from those meetings. They might want to just come in and hear part of it and leave, and so how is that gonna work?
That'd be a good question that would have to be addressed. I'm not 100% sure. Again, we haven't looked at everything because I didn't want to spend thousands or hundreds of man hours on a project that you may not want us to pursue. So my question is do you want us to pursue, and then we can address some of those questions as we go forward. Those buildings, again, if you have somebody in those public meetings, there is a city employee or a council member that's sponsoring the meeting. If it's a non-sponsored meeting, it should probably be limited to this room. The non-sponsored meetings, public meetings, should really not be back in our working environment.
Where do those fall in terms of sponsorship, like the committee meetings? If they meet in the conference room, who is technically sponsoring that meeting?
If they're an advisory committee through the city's sponsoring that meeting.
Okay. So who's the actual person in the room? Because like they have council liaisons, but we're not running the meeting.
Yeah, sometimes we're there, sometimes we're not. That's something that we'd probably have to address. If the chair would have limited access, or what we would need to do, we would have to address that at some point. I don't know that that's been contemplated at all. But anything the city is sponsoring, you would have to figure that out, what it is. Those
Some of them
advisory
meet
committees.
at the same time,
Right.
so you can't have both of them in the same room. You'd have to, yeah.
Your advisory committees, and oftentimes, I know like the sister cities, they have interviews for the youth delegation that may be going, and the city council's not involved in those really.
Right.
That's, they kind of are here to do what they need to do, and so those are things that we would have to definitely address and figure out before we jump, probably. But.
Well, maybe we need to take this a step further and look at our building design and figure out exactly where we need to have people getting access and not getting access. Because if I were a builder and I had to have an answer, that'd just be frustrating. Come in, wait for somebody to find the time to log off what they're doing on their computer, come to the front and escort me back, and then they got to log back in on their computer to answer my question.
Well, the log on when you walk away isn't really a log off. It's a Control-Alt-Delete or a Windows L key. It's a 2-key stroke key.
Okay.
To walk away from your computer, locks your computer. When you come back, you move the mouse, you type your password in, you're back in. If you're using a card system, you don't even do that. When you walk back in, you insert, type a pin or swipe.
But you told us that was too expensive.
No, what I told you was the single sign-on was too expensive.
Okay.
Single sign-on is a completely additional piece of the puzzle that could be utilized and implemented. But
I just look at the matriculation in and out of meetings that I'm a part of, and how people leave early and arrive late, and how disruptive that'd be for somebody to have to get up out of a meeting to go let somebody in. There's a lot of things I think we need to look through and study a little bit more.
Another way you can do that, sir, is by issuing them a visitor badge when they come in, and as they walk out, have a place that they can drop that visitor badge as they walk
Yeah,
out.
but somebody's got to get up from the meeting and go issue it.
If you decide to go with a visitor badge type process, that's not necessarily the case. In those type of scenarios where I've seen it, again, you issue the badge, that person has been identified, acknowledge that they're there, you have them, they're signed into a log of some sort, they have their badge, that they take care of their business, they walk out, they return their badge, and they're out of the
So
system.
who's assigning the badge though?
again, those are things that would have to be addressed as you go down the system. Realize we're not the first ones to think about going down this road. If you go to Idaho Falls, I believe you'll find that situation. If you go down to Sandy City and Salt Lake, you go down to Salt Lake City, you go to most major metropolitan areas, you're going to find a scenario where they don't let Joe citizen just walk through the door and walk into any office that they choose to walk in. And as you continue to have active shooter incidents and other type of scenarios like that, you're going to continue to see people increase that security, tighten it up, and the American people are going to start realizing that's a way of life. And that you'll accept it, and sometimes security costs. And if you want to ensure the security of your personnel, your physical resources, as well as your data resources, it's going to cost. It's going to be an inconvenience, but security is always an inconvenience and always will be. But as long as there's bad guys out there wanting to attack our individuals, attack our property, and attack our data resources and stuff, you've got to weigh the risks and the costs. If the council wants to say the costs are too high, we'll accept the risk, that's fine. I'm good with it any way the council wants to go. I just want to know, do you want to pursue something to help adjust and address the vulnerabilities, reduce the risks, reduce the threats, or do you want to accept those risks and let us focus on other projects and things?
I have a comment. So I know you're kind of looking for a little bit of guidance from us, and first of all, before I say my thought, I want to say thank you very much for being aware of this and for bringing this to our attention, and for constantly being on the lookout for ways that we can improve and be better and be more safe. So I want to commend you for that. I feel like I'm not really 100% able to give you an official answer right now. Inevitably, I'll wake up in the night and think of some question that I didn't think of today, or maybe one of the employees that's here will say, hey, have you considered this? And it's something that we need to think about or evaluate before we can say 100%, let's roll with it. I know you don't want to have to bring a box of waffles again. They don't remember that. But, anyway, so I guess that's my thought, is that maybe I need a little more time to process and think about it when we have our study session clarification, work session clarification, whatever we're calling it now. I don't know
what it's called either.
But that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know where everybody else is, but
I agree. I just think in this conversation now, we've brought up several situations that we haven't figured out yet. So certainly I am interested in having us be as safe and secure as we can, particularly our employees' safety should be first and foremost, but our property as well. Those are all important things for us to consider, and I'm glad that you're getting us to consider them. But I think we've got situations in the building that we haven't figured out, or maybe really looked at yet, exactly how we would make those work.
And I fully appreciate
so I have
that.
more questions.
This was new for me to present to you. I mean, this was the kind of the first, here it is, this is what we ought to do. May not be the first time for the building, because I think this has been presented to you about a year ago, and we've talked about it off and on over the years I've been here. The computer piece is definitely something new. So really just here to get you thinking about it. Again, you may not be ready to give me any guidance, but I've presented it, and when you've discussed it, and maybe if you have questions you want to meet and talk about it, we could put together somewhere down the road a committee that might look at all the potential questions. Again, this is very narrow-sighted. This is me looking at an issue and a problem, bringing you a potential solution. But again, I don't know all the operations of the city. I know I've learned quite a bit. I've been shocked over the 4 years of how a city operates. But there are still bits and pieces that I don't still fully understand. So it would require a few more people coming into the party to discuss it. I know the chief has some issues and concerns, and he has already stopped waiting and has already made some improvement on his side of the house. But they're very limited and in scope and capability for reducing the risk. So I'm willing to sit back. I can come back at another study session, working session, whatever we call these, after you've had a chance maybe to talk about it amongst yourselves, and maybe get some guidance from you down the road. if that's the way you want to go.
I'm very in favor of our beginning the process. And I think with our new building coming online, that's a good place to start. We can find out how effective it will be with our employees and with our building security. I think we need to do a lot more study before we spend a lot of money on this, but I want our people to feel secure, and I think it's going to take some retrofitting of our building to make the security necessary beyond just the doors.
And I'm not the expert on the physical side either. Again, I bring in some background from it, but I'm not an expert on developing physical security and the architectural and the engineering piece of that.
I think I would be inclined to have a study performed to see what we need to do to protect all of these things beyond what Chris has done for us. I really think we've got to look at the big picture, and this, I think, is...
And that may actually sort of require us bringing in a contractor to help us and guide us through that whole process, and maybe let out a bid or seek a bid of somebody to come in here and actually do that analysis for us, a formal analysis, and come to us with a formal bid.
This is big enough that we don't want to do some patching.
Yeah.
And so,
But in my mind, there's two issues here. One's cybersecurity and one's physical security.
You're right.
And I think the cybersecurity issue could be addressed quicker than waiting on a study of what the building looks like. You know, if what happens to Pocatello, what happened in Blackfoot happens to Pocatello, where they had ransomware installed on their system, they were really in Hurt City for several weeks, as I remember.
And they were, and then again, as I mentioned, shortly after I got here, we actually were hit with it, but because we were a little better prepared, and I know probably a little bit more about what happened up there than the rest, because I have some people who were willing to talk to me. We're in a much better position than they were when it happened to them. Does that mean it couldn't happen to us much worse than we've had? No, it could happen on any day. And again, it was just last week that we had an entire server get encrypted on us. And fortunately, the key to unencrypt it was available publicly.
Based on what you've done so far, Chris, could we start on cybersecurity now, and as we develop a study for the physical security, incorporate that into what we're doing?
Yes, I believe we could. The one company that has really been helpful to me actually does both pieces, and they can bring both those pieces together. Most of the people I talk to actually say to go the other direction, do your physical first, and then because then they can use the cards to the same cards to go onto the network. But in reality, from what I've seen and what I've looked at, I think it is easily the other direction, that you can start with the cybersecurity piece, and then you can build building security into it later using the same. Most door readers are going to be able to read most of the common cards that are out there today. They're all industry standards, so whatever methodology that card is using, most of the building locks systems will incorporate and work with those cards.
Do these cards something that IT could generate here, or would it need to go outside to some?
You buy the cards blank,
Yeah.
and they come in, and you have a printer that actually prints the ID card, and then that same machine is the machine that goes on, puts the user's name in there, allows the person to put their PIN in or whatever else, what additional information you
So
might
it's like
have.
instant issue bank cards?
Yeah. So those cards can have anything on them. The DoD common access cards, they have half your freaking medical profile encoded on the card, as well as a whole bunch of other information. We don't need all that information on the cards, obviously. We need the username, the individual's name, and the capability to put the PIN into the system.
And somehow in that it would be, you could restrict them to access wherever was needed, either cybersecurity or
Yep.
physical security.
Exactly. I can use it to limit access actually on the network if I needed to.
Mr. Mayor, and I think Heidi alluded to this, I think it's really important that we keep our City Hall citizen-friendly, and the access to key departments is really important. And so more study is needed before we make a decision. But I think in the next budget process, we need to be prepared to enact some of the things that are going to require some money.
Okay. All right, then we'll talk about it. again, and
Some additional
we'll give you
guidance will
some
be coming.
direction.
Additional guidance will come
Yes.
forth. Right now, I have no real direction to go.
Right now, the direction is hold for a minute,
I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
and we'll be letting you know kind of what our thought process, but it sounds like we want to do something coming in the next fiscal year anyway. And then we might look at the cybersecurity. Sooner than that, we'll visit, we've got our working, what is that called? Work session, study session.
Clarification, something or other.
What is that called? What do we call that? Mary?
Liaison work session clarification.
That thing.
Coming up next week.
You need to do an acronym for it, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll, I know there'll be some discussion about this in that meeting, and then we will also, so we'll give you some direction after that.
Outstanding.
I would just add that, probably the street department and sanitation aren't going to be the pivotal points. It's going to be where we deal much more broadly with many more people in this building. The number of people that you have a chance to anger is much greater here than in a given. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't have it at those buildings, but a disgruntled employee is more likely to occur in this building than over there.
Exactly, sir. That's why we were addressing this building first.
Or a disgruntled patron over here. Not too many people are going to
Exactly.
go over to the street department because of a pothole, but they could hear.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, council, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, the Street Operations Olympus Drive Extension Update. Tom Kirkman, Deputy Public Works Director, will present an update regarding the status of construction on Olympus Drive from Jerome Street to the new Siphon Road I-15 interchange. The presentation will include information regarding the design, infrastructure installation, and paving status, as well as information on the new pedestrian walkway, roundabout, and interchange.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Jeff Mansfield, Public Works Director and City Engineer. I'm joined today by Mariquel, Public Works Development Engineer, Tom Kirkman, the Deputy Public Works Director, and Ciara Simpson, Administrative Assistant for the Street Department. About a month and a half ago, we came to you with the Water Department to give you an update on where we had gotten with some of our water exploration activities. And since that time, Ruth has informed us that you had a desire to get more presentations from Public Works and to learn more about some of the things that we work on in Public Works. And so the first one that was on the list was an update on the Olympus Drive and Northgate extension. And so that's what we're here to present to you today. How many of you were able to attend the field trip last week? Okay, so a good majority of you. So some of this may be somewhat of a repeat, but we think we've kind of brought a new perspective to it that hopefully will give you additional information. And so we appreciate your support on this project, and it's been a big project for our staff. This is probably one of the biggest projects that we've ever worked on in the city of Pocatello, and it definitely requires a lot of our time and efforts. And so we appreciate your support. With that, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Tom.
Good morning. First, before we start, I'd like to give a little thanks to Ken. You'll see in our presentation, we had him take his drone up, and so we can actually have a bird's eye view of what's going on up there, and then Ciara for putting it together and making sure I don't break it. So that's why she's here to help. So first off, we'll start with a little bit of history. In the winter of 2015 into 2016, the city had determined that the section of road on Olympus between Butte and Jerome, we needed to do something to improve the quality of that road. The road was degrading. It wasn't very traffic friendly. It wasn't very pedestrian friendly. So we got together on that and decided that we were going to expand that section from Butte Road through Jerome. So we got together with Bannock County and got a plan together where we could try and tackle this together. So between the county and the city, we got together and we kind of decided that the city was going to take care of the east side of the road, and the county was going to take care of the west side of the road, and we were going to widen this thing and make it better. So we started in design in early winter, as we were saying, and then in April and May, that's when we took off and started working on this section of road. And if any of you remember it before, it was very narrow. You went from 5 lanes down to 2 really quickly. There was drainage issues on both sides. The west side, there was an elevation change that dropped into the wellness center. And so we took all of those factors in and developed a plan. And so what we ended up doing is we added curb and gutter on both sides of the road. We fixed some drainage issues that were there. We're able to now take that storm water, put it out onto the soccer field so that we can have some pre-treatment on that storm water. Instead of just dumping it right in the river, we can use that area to clean it up a little bit. With that, we put in new catch basins. On the east side of the road, we installed sidewalks. And then on the west side of the road, a 10-foot multi-use path was installed that really increased the pedestrian mobility up there. And along with that, we installed 2 new crosswalks at Butte and Jerome. And with that, we installed what we call RFIBs. They're rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So as you approach a crosswalk, they're a solar-powered sign with flashing lights. You push it, and it signals to motorists that someone needs to cross there. So those were installed. And then on the county, I thought, did a really fine job on the west side. They built kind of a retaining wall, and then they were able to get some of the rock that was used on the wellness center to kind of tie the wellness center into that road. So it turned out to be a really good project.
As a side note, the county and the border between the city of Pocatello and Bannock County is the center line of the road. So.
Right. We ended up at about $250,000 between each agency to widen that road, which we thought was, and we did it, I think, in 5 weeks. It was a pretty awesome project that we were all really proud of. We came in, at a really very reasonable budget, and we did it in a very quick amount of time. So we were excited about that. So, and I guess just a little bit of an outline of how we're going to do this. We've kind of broken this up into about 4 or 5 sections, and we're just going to talk about each one and just kind of talk about the construction aspects of it today.
Tom, before you move from that slide, beyond what we can see, what was done underneath?
So underneath here, aside from the storm drain issues, everything was in place that needed to be. The water and sewer was there. So in this particular stretch, there was no infrastructure upgrades that needed to be done under that. Okay, and along with that also, I know it's probably easier to look from up here, but we also put in ADA accessible curb ramps. That's a big part of this too as well. So we'll move on next from Jerome to Chubbuck Road, and so you can see as we go through there, kind of the similar profile that was designed on the extension or the expansion between Butte and Jerome. 4 lanes with a center turn lane, curb and gutter on both sides again, sidewalk on the east side, and then after the curb was installed, the county went through and repaved the multi-use path to kind of match that new existing curb and gutter. Now in this section, that's where a lot of infrastructure was placed, water, sewer, and as well as storm sewer upgrades were put in there, as well as a lot of the other utilities. There's conduits in the ground for telecommunications, gas, power, all that stuff. Right now, can you go back? Sorry. As we move down on the far end, this intersection is turned into a 3-way stop, so there's a stop sign now on Chubbuck Road. And the intersection can be a little problematic where it's a T intersection, so the crosswalks were moved back a couple hundred feet back from the intersection. And then ADA accessible ramps were put there, and then crosswalks will be installed. They're not at this time. And then we'll also put the RFIBs, the beacons up there. Those will be installed as well.
That crosswalk then is where the little bump is?
Yeah, I think it's right in here somewhere.
It's down.
Down here?
Yeah, it's
right
it's
here.
just at the bottom of the screen across Olympus, and then you can see on over in Chubbuck Road section, the little black path
Over
right
here.
there. That
Sorry,
would
I
be
should
the
point
other
up
one
here
there.
for you. So, any questions on that section? This also, there is adequate right-of-way. Right now, it's a three-way T intersection, but there's adequate right-of-way there for the future if we feel that it warrants a traffic signal. All the conduits are under the ground. There was a lot of pre-planning that went into that, so if the need arises down in the future, that's something that we're ready to tackle. Okay, so now we'll move on up from Chubbuck Road. Oops, sorry, one more. Forward. So we talked about that. Let's go forward one. I apologize, go back. Okay, so now we're going to go from Chubbuck Road to what we've called Little Pocatello Creek. It's the old drainage section that goes down through here. We've broken this up. So you can see it's a similar road profile. There is 4 lanes, 2 going each way, but now there's a center median down the middle of the road. There's sidewalk on the west side of the road. Some of the neat features that they've done here, or the engineering they've done, is the road was raised approximately 25 feet through there. There's a natural ravine there. They put a 36-inch drainage structure through there, and it was all engineered to handle the 100-year event. So it will function basically as it has for ever. All infrastructure has been placed under the road from here all the way to the end, and there will be landscaping in the center medians moving forward. So any questions on that? Okay, let's go to the next section. So now we're going to head from Little Pocatello Creek, and we're going to head to the pedestrian underpass. So once again, as we said, you'll see as we're moving along, it's the same road profile. We do have, can you pause it right there? We do have right here one of the limited accesses. That's one thing on the section of road, there will be limited access. That helps with traffic movement. And so this will be District Drive.
Full movement.
And it'll be full movement in and out. And so you can see that's where the islands end. Okay, so as we move ahead, you can see the pedestrian tunnel up here. The developers wanted to make this a walkable community. And so instead of crosswalks, they opted to build a pedestrian underpass that goes underneath the road. It is 20 feet wide, 10 foot tall, and 150 feet long right through there. There's curb and gutter on both sides. The stormwater's taken care of. There's lighting, there's railings on top. It's ADA accessible, there's stairs. Kind of a neat little project right there. So any questions on that section? Okay. So as we move along next, we'll go from the pedestrian underpass to the roundabout. This roundabout is a 2-lane roundabout. Just to give you some sort of a scale, the roundabout at Pocatello Square is 150-foot diameter. This one's 200-foot diameter, so it's the largest roundabout that we have in Pocatello. 170. Oh, 170, I apologize. There will be central lighting in the middle of the, there will be lighting in the central island. There will be minimal landscape so that site obstruction isn't a problem. And as well as there will be a lot of signs and striping, just like in most roundabouts, to help guide and direct people through there. Okay. Next, we'll go on from the roundabout what turns into Northgate Parkway. This is a 2-lane both directions with a center median. There'll be landscape, there'll be lights in that. You'll see on the south side, there is a 10-foot paved all walking path, or an all-purpose path. So the sidewalk ends, the 5-foot sidewalk ends at that corner and turns into this multi-use path. And so as this goes down, there will be landscaping as well as lights in the center island. You can see that it's limited on access, so it's going to be a good road, a good conduit to carry traffic through there. And also underneath here, all the infrastructure's been in place. So one of the neat things they're doing up there is they're putting all the power underground. So when you go up there, you won't see any power poles, you won't see any wires. Okay. So once we get to the next section, is from the roundabout to the interchange. And so the interchange, I think we've talked about, we'll kind of go over that. Initially, the bids went out the 5th of June in 2018. The bids came in at about $3 million over. Some of that may have been in part to some of the tight timelines, so it was rebid with some different exceptions. The bid was opened on September 11th, and the low bid came in at $13 million, which is 97% of the engineer's estimate. So they awarded the bid. Cannon Builders is the contractor that was awarded that project, and they started actually Monday, November 5th. They started breaking ground on the interchange. So the interchange will be a pretty traditional interchange. You'll be going over the interstate as opposed to under it, like Pocatello Creek. It'll be 5 lanes, 2 travel lanes each way, and then a center turn lane. It'll be conventional on and off ramps. It'll be a signalized interchange, and they're also going to put in some colored concrete and some certain design elements to kind of improve the aesthetics of that interchange as well. So I know that was kind of quick, but if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
I had heard initially when the initial bid was over that they had eliminated the signalization to get the cost down. Is that back in?
That's the way we understand it. I think they put it as an addenda that it could be out if the bids came in too high. They had traffic signals that they could exclude and street lights that they could exclude if the bids came in too high. But the way the bids came in, it will include the traffic signal, which is good news for us. We were excited about that.
Good.
So I know it was quick and easy.
I love all the emphasis on making us more bike ped friendly, more walkable. I'm curious though about the pedestrian tunnel. And I guess this might be more the developers, a question for the developer, but have we looked at other communities with tunnels like that and the success of those? I mean, do people like them? Are they usable? Is it a security issue? Is it like aesthetically, do people react well to it or something? I mean, the idea of walking through a long tunnel, and I know it's lit, but like walking outside in air and trees looks much more appealing to me than walking through a tunnel. So I'm just curious what the experience has been.
You're seeing a lot of these pedestrian tunnels going in. When we did the South Valley Road project, the Greenway actually crosses under South Valley Road.
Mm-hmm.
There's a tunnel out there, and we've had just really nothing but great feedback from that.
Good.
So we can speak of our personal experiences, but
Okay.
there's a lot of these pedestrian tunnels going in, nationwide, and I think it all just ties back into good lighting and making it somewhat appealing, so you don't have those problems.
Well, I think people feel safer and more confident walking underneath the road rather than
on
dodging
it,
cars
right.
as they're coming at 45 miles an hour.
Yeah.
My son goes to school up in Helen, Montana, and there's a tunnel similar to this that goes right into the campus, and it gets regularly used.
Yeah. That's what I'm curious of, if there's other projects and people responded well to that.
And that was one thing when we did the LED light upgrades at the underpass. That's one thing that I think people really enjoyed about that, is it just brightens it up and it kind of makes it feel like you're not in a tunnel as bad. You don't feel as
If
claustrophobic.
it's dark and dingy looking, then that's probably not
Right.
that appealing, but brighten it up and go from there. It's nice.
Okay. Any other questions for us?
Okay.
That's great.
We got one.
Have you guys done anything to anticipate if we create the TIF district up there, how much you might have to outlay from street department alone?
I think that right now is still kind of a moving target right now. There's going to be some private roads up there, and we really haven't had a chance to get our head totally wrapped around that yet.
Is-
Where we're at for street department, for just maintenance, we're usually about $25,000 per centerline mile. If we just take our overall street budget and divide it by how many miles are in town. So aside from that 30,000 foot, that's about where we're at right now.
Okay.
One of the things that Buck said the other day was that these roads should be maintenance-free for 25 years, outside of moving dirt and snow.
Sweeping,
Whatever material it is they're using.
any lighting, it will probably be on us.
Yeah, we pay the lighting bill, the electricity for all the street lights in town. So
Is that a norm that you can have a street that you don't do, well, even if 25 years, you know, you still got to be putting in towards it rather than just boom.
Yeah. One thing about pavement is, you know, it's affected by the sun, the UV rays, and the rain. And so the minute you lay an asphalt road, it begins degrading. And so 25 years without any maintenance is a little bit of a stretch. There's going to be some maintenance there. I think what he was getting at was that the substructure of the road is built very well, so that it'll sustain that, you know, the heavy loads, the wheel rutting and stuff like that. But as far as the asphalt being maintenance free for 25 years, that's probably not the case.
So we'll probably have to be in there and seal it or something.
Yeah, and so we'll just evolve that into our normal pavement management program. You know, when we have a new road, we try and go in there the first 4 or 5 years and put in a fog seal, which is kind of like waxing your car. It's a really light treatment, but it helps keep the sun and the rain out. And then as it degrades, we start working other treatments. So.
Okay, any other questions? Super, thank you.
Nice job.
I'll get one last one.
Oh,
The center lane, so is that a 2 lane, so it'd be × 2 per mile on a 4 lane?
That's just center line miles, yep. And so it kind of takes, it's not the greatest metric, because some lanes are full.
I'm just looking for a
Yeah, that's a ballpark.
Okay, so it'd be like $50,000
For 2
a
miles.
month.
Yeah.
okay, thank you very much. Council, this next item, the last time we talked, it took about 3 hours to talk about. I would propose a break before we jump into the middle of agenda item 5. If you're okay with that, we'll go ahead and take a break for a few minutes, and we will be right back.
I know.
Check everybody.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us after the break. We'll go ahead and continue with agenda item number 5, criminal background screening update. Human Resources staff will be joined by Parks and Recreation staff to present proposed policy and guidelines for criminal background screening of city employees and volunteers. This policy presentation is in response to the council's directions given to staff at the September 13, 2018 work session. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. John Banks, Parks and Recreation Director. Lynette is feeling a little under the weather. In fact, I'm a little nervous sitting next to her. So I'm going to be, I'll just handle the presentation. I'm hoping if she coughs, it'll be Kirk's direct.
He is the risk manager.
So anyway, Lynette Sampson and Kirk Bivey, obviously from legal. Mayor and council members, Human Resources, Parks and Recreation Department, and Legal Department staff have discussed implementation of an improved and more defined background check process with council on various occasions the past several months. The most recent being at the September 13th City Council work session. At that time, Human Resources Department staff was directed to develop a standard process and set of guidelines for background checks. Those proposed to be subject to the background checks are, number 1, all new employees as a pre-employment condition. Number 2, specific current employees who may be seeking promotion, transfer, or reassignment to a position which has a capacity to work unsupervised with children or other vulnerable populations, examples being recreation, department, or library employees, or as may be needed in relation to specific responsibilities of the position being sought. A good example would be those who would be handling money as part of their new duties. And lastly, annual checks of all volunteers participating in the provision of city-sanctioned or sponsored programs and services who have a potential for working in an unsupervised setting with children or other potentially vulnerable populations. For examples, this would be your large volume of youth volunteer coaches, your volunteers at the library, or other volunteers who may be deemed to meet the criteria of potential exposure to a vulnerable population, and these would be determined on a case-by-case basis. Regarding next steps, at the November 1st City Council meeting, Council did approve entering into a subscriber agreement with Background Investigation Bureau, a third-party vendor, to provide screening services for the city. And a $10,000 allocation has been included in the Human Resources budget, and this is sufficient to cover the first year of screening services. Just referring to the chart here, there's a couple different types of screening services. The 1195 variety would be for the large volume of the youth volunteer coaches. You can see the estimates below. That's going to be the vast majority of the screenings that we do on an annual basis, and these are the folks that have the most kind of unsupervised exposure to youngsters with city sanction as part of kind of the city's youth sports programs. And then the 1695, that's a slightly beefed up version of the background check process, would be for all of the new hires or employees seeking transfer opportunities with a change of duties. So those are the two different types, and then kind of an estimated breakdown of the numbers that we would be talking about in any one year. Human Resources has prepared guidelines and procedures for background check implementation, and these were developed based on council direction that has been received and built around the need for screening of the 3 identified categories. This internal policy document is currently in legal department review, and that should be completed shortly. Human Resources staff today is seeking council permission with the agreement that has been approved to begin implementing the screening services with Background Investigation Bureau for, as mentioned previously, 1, all new employees, current employees seeking specific promotion, transfer, or reassignment opportunities within the city, and lastly, all volunteers participating in city programs that work with in an unsupervised setting with children or other vulnerable populations, or have the capacity to do so. And with that, Lynette and I and Kurt would be happy to answer any questions that the council might have.
Do other cities have similar programs to this, cities of our size?
Yes, they, a lot of cities our size and larger, they do criminal background screening prior to hire.
On all employees?
All new employees.
I agree with and understand the new employees and stuff. I'm more interested in volunteers. Do they have the same backgrounds on volunteers, checks and things, or?
They do for youth sports coaches and volunteers in parks and libraries.
But that's where it stops.
Yeah.
We've kind of, in the guidelines, Lynette, which I think was very wise, kind of left it a little bit open to staff interpretation. It's hard to kind of project into the future what type of volunteer or new program you might have that might require a background check. So we chose to leave it as, any other volunteer deemed to have potential for exposure to vulnerable populations. So that gives us the levity to kind of case-by-case base it in the future if we have a unique situation. And we also, we really like the idea of kind of contracting this service out to a professional, highly qualified, neutral third-party vendor with this expertise. We think that's in the best interest of the city as well.
And we have those services available in our community?
Yes. Well, Background Investigation Bureau would be providing those services, yeah.
What's the rate of false positives?
Well, I don't know that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I never even thought to look at that.
We do have a conference call with them today to talk about a few things. We have never asked that question, but we can certainly ask it.
Well, the reason I ask is I was getting my driver's license renewed recently, and a friend of mine was in the line for the second time that day because she's 70 years old and she had a false positive criminal background thing on her driver's license. And it took her several hours to get it squared away, and it turned out it was someone with the exact same name in Virginia who was wanted on an arrest warrant. And it cost her a lot of grief, and I'm just curious if they have a similar problem.
We'll ask that question. One of the kind of contingencies in this is if something is red flagged, let's say for a youth volunteer coach or an employee, staff will be notified, the department head and legal and HR, so we can get right in the middle of that and kind of see if any of those situations exist. So there is kind of a catch before it gets to the employee, but we'll definitely ask that question.
I'd like to consider adding one additional category of employee, and that's utility billing personnel who are out, not utility, water meter readers, who are out in the community, sometimes in people's yards doing their job. To me, that's another potential for a problem.
That will be taken care of with new hires, new employees, new hires. That will be taken care of, I believe, unless I've misunderstood. Kirk, you've been working with potential issues of current employees going back and doing a background check on current one. Is there an issue there?
Yeah, there's an issue there. And I know that was part of what we wanted to look at, but, from my perspective, I don't know where the funding's going to come from that in the first place. And then secondly, I don't know what we do with the information once we get it. The problem is if we have an employee, a current employee who we do a background check on a current employee, and the employee has otherwise been a good employee, and we find out that there's some odd thing in the past that would have otherwise disqualified this employee from acting, I can't act on it. And the person's a good employee. So,
don't you usually have, at least like I'm aware, there's been several people who have said they didn't have any criminal background on their application?
Yes.
And then you do the background check says that they lied on their application?
Yes.
Isn't that grounds for dismissal?
It potentially is, but we're going to catch those. That's the reason we're doing this now. But you're talking past tense.
Past tense. You're talking about an employee that. That's usually often. It's not usually. It's sometimes the case.
Yeah. Well, I think I would prefer to talk about that in a different setting, if you don't mind. This is a case-by-case situation that it's going to be totally dependent upon the facts, how we react to those sorts of things. But yes, conceptually, if somebody misrepresents their credentials or their criminal history, and we find out about that, even accidentally somewhere down the road, we can't ignore it. That bell's been rung. We'll just have to deal with it when it occurs.
But moving forward, this would catch this.
Yes.
Well,
as we move forward.
Yes, and getting back to the earlier question about false positives or whatever, part of the goal here would be to build into the process to give the applicant the opportunity to contest, and straighten out a mistake and say, no, that's not me, that's Lynette. Didn't even get the gender right.
And how wide does this group look in terms of the background check? Because some of them are limited to a state, some of them are limited to a geographical region, some of them go out, look across the whole United States, and some of them may even go beyond that.
They will do an address search, and then they will, based on the addresses of the person, that is where they will look at the county record level at each address, I think 7 years back. And they have runners that, if it's not an online electronic system, then they do have people that go and get those records from the county themselves. So it would be a nationwide search.
So just as there are false positives, there are false negatives too.
Those won't be contested.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
But that's where sometimes you do the second one or for something else when they're moving to another level and something's creeped in and all once.
Yeah. Mayor, one of the things that was brought up at the last time we were here was actually brought up by Ann Nichols, and it's a legitimate point, and we've got to figure out a way to pare this down. You know, we can't get in the business of trying to do background checks on people with in the Sister City program. Certainly not the foreign aspect of the Sister City program. You know, there's just risks in the world that we can't guarantee every time. We're trying to anticipate what's forward.
The key is initially this came forward for parks and the coaches.
Correct.
And things like that. That's what this initially came forward, and then it kind of blew up the last meeting that we had. Went from, let's do a couple background checks on some new employees and our parks, youth, baseball, football, basketball coaches, to make sure that we don't have any issues there, to background checking everybody that's walked through the city hall and their kids and families and relatives and stuff. And so I think you can be very overreaching. You bring up a really good point. We can be very overreaching, or we can keep this really manageable and probably see how it goes from there. And then if we need to take the next step and go another step forward, then that's what we do. But we can't be all encompassing it immediately and see what happens.
That being said, on the new volunteers, how are we interpreting? Are we doing all new volunteers, or?
All new volunteers that, I guess, new youth sports coaches or any volunteer that we deem could have unsupervised exposure to kids or some other vulnerable population. And we think annual checks for this group. You have some coaches, you know, their kids are young and they play basketball and they play baseball and they play flag football. We're not going to background check them for each season, but an annual check feels very reasonable. A lot of things could happen in a year before we, I guess, give city sanctioned access to the kids again. So we're advocating for any new volunteer or annually for returning volunteers.
What about, and this is where exactly what you were saying happened when we were when it exploded and we started talking about all the other types of volunteers. I mean, Sister Cities was one of the things that came up, but also if Hannah Sanger is leading a cleanup session on the river and there's people volunteering and they might have kids helping. I mean, we're not doing all of that.
No, I think the line in the sand in our mind and what we're recommending is unsupervised access to children. So in a situation like that, you'd have, you know, Hannah or somebody from city staff and multiple adults kind of in the same setting, whereas a sports league, you know, a lot of parents work, they'll drop their kids off. It could be the coach, the assistant coach, and 10 kids without any other supervision. So it's just, those are kind of the different types of situations in our mind where the line is drawn. And we've also tried to just be really specific on new employees and the types of, I guess, current employees that would be seeking positions. Like if, I don't know, let's say somebody in the water, who knows, the WPC went to the Parks and Recreation Department. Well, they go from a position where they have zero risk of exposure to kids or vulnerable populations to a pretty high exposure. So that would trigger a check, you know, seeking that type of opportunity. Or if someone going from, who knows, animal services to utility billing where they handle money all day, that, you know, that would also trigger a check. But we've tried to, you know, new employees and those select situations. Besides that, we've really tried to keep the focus fairly narrow so that it doesn't blow up.
Mr. Mayor, thinking in terms of fiscal responsibility, have we considered that there be a quote-unquote application fee when someone is applying for one of these things so that they would fund it rather than the city? Has that been considered at all?
It has, you guys chime in any time, it has been considered. When you're trying to, I guess, recruit a youth coach to dedicate, you know, hours and hours a week for multiple weeks or months, We kind of feel like they're kind of paying enough with their volunteer effort, and we kind of looked at it as the cost of doing business, that the city would pick that up in return for their volunteerism. We felt, $11.95 per coach to get that kind of volunteerism for our community was reasonable. So we have thought about it, but we fear it would be a deterrent to attracting coaches, which is a difficult proposition to begin with.
Would it also be an eliminating factor if a person knew that they were going to have this background check?
It could be, but that's if it is an eliminating factor, I guess I would say, we probably wouldn't want them that coaches anyway.
You saved $11.95, Jim.
Yeah, that's.
If I remember back when my kids were in these programs and stuff, it wasn't like you had an abundance of people jumping up and down screaming to volunteer to coach.
Yeah,
we were begging and pleading, and I remember I got roped into a number of kicking and screaming, quite frankly, and how to coach. I don't know anything about girls softball, but I learned. Because there were 15 girls on a team that not any other parent would step up and say, okay, I'll do this.
And Mayor, we've got a couple of teams available now.
Yeah, that's true. I'm way too old for that, I'll tell you that. But the reality is the volunteers are just not jumping out there for that, because it is a solid commitment of a couple hours every day for that season, and then you got a mark on you, and the next season, guess who's going to be the coach? And
yeah, well said. That's Mr. Johnston. That's exactly kind of the sentiment. It's that and trying to find good, umpires and officials for the games. It's really challenging. It might come across as a deterrent, so we were concerned about that.
I would be cautious with that, and then I would also just remind the council we don't want to background or check out of volunteers background check the city citizens out of volunteering at all, and we could very quickly go down that slippery slope with this, from what I could see. So,
how fast do these background checks happen?
3 to 10 days. We'll find out more for sure this afternoon.
Pretty quick.
So what specifically do you need from us? I agree with your recommendation.
Well, we council did approve the agreement with Background Investigation Bureau. I guess, kind of based on previous discussions and council direction, we thought the scope should be these categories: the new employees, the current employees who are applying for a job that has exposure to vulnerable populations or money or whatever the case may be that staff deems appropriate, and then of course the volunteers who we do give kind of city-sanctioned access to the children. So that kind of narrow scope, we would love council to give us permission to start proceeding with this. And from the Parks and Recreation standpoint, we would begin implementing this with our boys junior jazz and girls 7th and 8th junior jazz that starts right after the new year.
I think that sounds good. And I know you had on one of your other slides about sister cities and host families. I would not think we would need to take it to that extreme of doing every family member in the household. And so, yeah, what you've recommended I think is good.
I keep going back to this fiscal responsibility. We charge a fee for the teams. Would that be an area where this fee could be added so that it is not necessarily impacting the city budget in any other way?
Absolutely. I mean, we'd be looking at fiscal 20 fee resolution, but that's a good idea. That's something to think about, to maybe incorporate this as part of the, in recognition for, the coach volunteering, everybody maybe chips in a little bit with their upfront fees to cover that cost.
So I think 10,000 here and 10,000 there, it starts adding up in, in our city budget, and I'd like us to look at that as a possibility, John.
Sure. I think spread over, the large number of youth sports programs, from Bannock baseball to junior jazz to girls soccer, it would be a nominal increase per person
Okay.
or per team, so that's
Okay.
not a bad idea.
I like that idea as well. Good.
Okay.
So how many teams are you going to sponsor?
How,
I'm just a spectator.
any other questions, council?
Do we need a motion?
We can definitely take a motion. We got action item on it, so we can take an action if you would like.
I move we proceed with the recommendations as proposed by the committee.
Second.
With the caveat that the fee be added into the sports fee.
When the 2020 fee resolution comes up next year.
Okay, so we have a motion and by Cheatham and a second by Adamson.
May I get clarification? Councilmember Adamson, when you said you didn't feel the host family should have background check, were you saying the hosts themselves would, or that
No, I
totally
think-
eliminated?
I think it would, from my perspective, maybe we need to have a conversation with that committee and see what their recommended, course of action would be, but maybe just new members of the committee potentially, or
I
does
think
Ann have a
that,
feedback on that?
I think that the motion was this: new employees, seasonal employees, and things like that. I think that what I heard you
But
say
they would
was
fall under, yeah,
don't jump into the sister cities and all the
yeah.
volunteers throughout the country that want to come to Pocatello and volunteer necessarily, but I think that's what you were saying.
I think when we had the sister cities, it was talking about the people who may travel with the students.
Like the chaperone, or
The
maybe the
chaperone
person who
that stays
does
overnight
the
in
language training
Los
with them,
Angeles
and
before
that
they
would
fly to
be
Japan.
the limit.
It wasn't real far ranging that way.
Also
that-
volunteers?
That falls into the case-by-case
I would agree.
thing is what I would
Yeah.
think is.
So that'd be a
the
very
way this was
specific
included.
instance, and
Yeah, and
That's okay.
you're covered under your vulnerability there, but I wouldn't say it precludes
Yeah,
looking at who's going to be a
yeah,
chaperone.
we're not talking about all volunteers.
Only new volunteers that are youth sports coaches?
Yes, that's what we're talking about right now in that motion, I believe.
Yes.
Ann?
Mayor, Council, Ann Nichols, Administrative Services Manager. Councilman Bray, when you brought up the chaperone going over, that brought up a bigger question for sister cities. When the delegates come from Japan here, the committee has a lot of volunteers that go out with them, spouses and whatnot. So we got to thinking, do they also need to be background checked? And then it brought it up to the host families. We're putting these children from Japan in families here in town, that it is our responsibility, should we be background checking them as well? So it kind of went bigger than what you had originally suggested, and that's where we have kind of landed, was that yes, all the subcommittee members should probably be background checked, because at one point in time they may be assisting with the classes for the delegates. It won't be just the chaperone. It probably should be each of the individuals who are going out, whether they're a spouse of the Sister City Committee member, because again, unsupervised, supervised is being defined as having a staff member present. Staff doesn't go on the trip to Yellowstone or down to Lava with them, so all of the family members going, adults should be background checked as well, and then those staying in the host families here locally, we should probably be background checking those as well, because again, the Japanese folks are trusting us to have their children, and then that went to just background checking the adults or the full household. We could potentially have teenagers at 16 years of age with backgrounds as well. That's kind of where we landed with that.
I'd look at something that some of the volunteer big organizations like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, how they manage their background check, because they don't go to every degree, but they do have a line that they follow, and it might be that we need to develop policy that just says that no adult should be, because that's what a lot of policies require anymore.
And I would prefer something much more along those lines, specifically for this committee, because unfortunately sometimes in the past, to get a host family, They're just nailing down the last 5 host families as the plane is landing here for the kids. And so to wait 3 to 10 days for a kid to be in a home is going to be impossible. And so that's going to be very difficult for this committee.
And it's hard to get them to sign up to be a host family as well, so it goes back to that.
And now they're going to be background checked, knowing potentially that they
If
may
they have to
a
go through all of that, they might
14-year-old
just
that-
say no, and then,
I think flexibility is going to be really important for us. As I look at this, I feel comfortable in voting in favor of this, but I think there are going to be other ways in which we are going to have to refine this policy so that we protect the children, protect the dollars, protect us. So I think this is a moving procedure that we're going to have to revisit.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ruth, could you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Gina?
Yes.
Adamson?
yes.
Gray?
Yes.
Lurick?
Yes.
Johnston?
Yes.
Thank you. And we'll move on to agenda item number, thank you very much, you three, for your hard work there. Move on to agenda item number 6, proposed hands-free ordinance. Staff will present a proposed ordinance enacting a new section of Pocatello Municipal Code, Title 10, Chapter 8, Section 270, distracted driving, prohibiting the use of mobile electronic devices while driving, establishing penalties, and allowing law enforcement officers to stop vehicles for violations. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Jared Johnson, City Attorney. With me is Major Shai from Pocatello Police Department. You each have been given copies of the draft ordinance that has been prepared. I'm happy to go through it. I don't know how much time you've had to be able to spend with it, but what I was thinking is I could go through it, hit some of the highlights, and then we would be available to answer any questions. Ultimately, starting on page 2, this is an ordinance that has definitions to begin with, as our ordinances do. The mobile electronic device is defined there in A1. Importantly, this does not include radios designed for the Citizens Band Service or the amateur radio service. Those are regulated by the FCC. We've already had one public comment asking about that, and that is a fair comment, and we are not including that in this ordinance. We don't have the jurisdiction to be able to do so. Motor vehicles defined in Idaho code, we're adopting that definition in this ordinance. Operate, as you can see, is the driver's position of a motor vehicle on any road. It does not include parked and standing. Ultimately, those definitions are the same in the ordinance, but they mean different things to different people. We define parked and standing as it does not include when you're stopped at a traffic signal or something to that effect. So for that reason, it's important that drivers understand that you're operating a vehicle even if the vehicle's stopped, other than parked or standing. So we can talk more about that if you have questions there. So B is ultimately what the prohibition is, and B is that while operating a motor vehicle, the person shall not use a mobile electronic device as defined. The exceptions to that, starting on the third page there, are for basically number 1 is your first responders, law enforcement, firefighter, EMTs, the list goes on. It also includes public utilities when responding to a public utility emergency. There are certainly other there's going to be other things that people think should be considered an emergency. It's hard to create an all-inclusive list, but I think this list is reasonable, and it's at least a good starting point. The second exception is for drivers under those emergency circumstances. And again, it's impossible to consider every emergency circumstance that a driver might feel entitled to be able to use their mobile electronic device. But we, I think, encapsulated the biggest and most obvious ones. From a prosecution standpoint, there's always going to be people claiming the defense of using one of these, doing it under one of these exceptions, and that's where officer discretion and just the situation on a case-by-case basis will be a determining factor. The third exception is the use of global positioning or navigation systems. Again, these devices have that capability most of the time. That can be used, but what can't happen is you can't enter the information for your destination as you're operating the vehicle. similar to a vehicle that has that built into the vehicle's operating system. So a lot of times once you're engaged in operating, the vehicle locks you out of your ability to enter that information. Similar prohibitions here. And then finally, it is a hands-free ordinance. We are not prohibiting the use if you can do it by a hands-free mechanism either built into the device or as an accessory to the device. You can proceed with the call or the voice text, and you can even use it just to activate that portion of the system. Every phone is different or every manufacturer is different, but sometimes it's a double click on a button or something like that. That is an appropriate use as long as you're not continuing to use that device while you're operating the vehicle. Those are the exceptions. Section D talks about the fact that what we're recommending is that this become a primary or sole reason for initiating a traffic stop or issuing a citation. We have primary and secondary traffic offenses. Secondary offenses mean the officer can't pull the individual over just for that offense. Primary is an offense that they can be pulled over primarily for that offense. Again, officer discretion would always be involved. They would have the ability to decide if that's the reason they want to initiate a traffic stop or if they want to issue a citation based solely on that. But they have that ability under this draft. And then finally, the penalty section. This is, again, up to you, council, how you would like to proceed, but the recommendation at this point is that the first 3 violations of this would be an infraction in an amount to be set by council as part of a resolution, so that wouldn't have to change as an ordinance every time we wanted to change it. If there was more than 3 violations within a 2-year period, the 4th violation would become a misdemeanor under our code, which is up to 6 months in jail and up to $1,000 fine, and/or it doesn't have to be both. This also points out that this will not go on the points count system under Idaho code that insurance companies use for determining their rates. It would also be considered under Idaho code a non-moving violation. Therefore, it would have 0 points associated with it. It would not subject the driver to potential license suspension as well. That is all I have as far as an overview of the ordinance itself as it's been drafted. If you'd like to go ahead and share what you have. Or?
Sure. So we pulled some stats from 2015 to 2018. They're up on the board here. When you see the texting or cell phone usage that was noted from the officers, and then the inattentive driving in relationship, you have their percentages there for each year. And there's probably a lot where the officers didn't note something. This is where they did note something that was involved. So chances are that's probably going to be higher than what's on there. When you look at what the national percentages are, I think as states and cities initiate these type of ordinances and laws, that the usage has gone down, especially with the use of being able to link it to the car. A lot of people are doing that. So a lot of people that don't have that capability, you'll see talking on a cell phone, or you don't have a sync or a blue link or an OnStar or something where you can link it up to your vehicle. Most of the new vehicles do have that, which is why you see some of those numbers going down from handheld cell phone use from 6 to 16, and those numbers are probably going to be a little bit lower as the technology improves. So I talked to Jared a lot. We've had a lot of communication on this, and we decided the non-moving violation based off what would be consistent with some other state statutes and what's out there. So we just didn't throw some darts at the board. We actually looked at it and compared some things. So.
And on that note as well, Section 3 mentions that this is a temporary regulation. Idaho code does not allow us to put in permanent regulations in the traffic code that aren't covered by state code, but they do allow for temporary regulations. So one of the decisions you would need to make as a council if you decide to move forward with this is determine how long you would like it to be in effect before we look at it again and review it and decide if it needs to be reenacted or done away with. And if at any time the state adopts something that we think is similar, we can repeal this ordinance at that point.
So define temporary.
Good question. My idea of temporary would feasibly be anything between 1 to 4 years.
Jared, I'm concerned in terms of the people coming to our community that might not be aware of our ordinance. Do we put a sign at the city limits and notify people that they could be fined?
Certainly could.
And that's something we did talk about too. We talked about posting that maybe on, as they're coming in on the freeway, Highway 30, in all directions. This is a hands-free zone. Violators will be prosecuted. So.
Will reading that sign distract them?
Well, you could also, the police officers have the discretion to visit with them for a minute and find out if they've been here for 7 months and haven't changed their license plates, or if they've been here for 5 minutes to get their gas. They can definitely use some discretion there, I would think.
Now, we know that Idaho Falls has implemented an ordinance similar to this.
Yes.
What's the prevalence of this throughout our state and region?
It's a good question. I don't know. I know there's several entities that have passed ordinances that are somewhat along the hands-free line. The state passed a no texting law a few years ago. It's very limited in its scope, and in my opinion, limited in our ability to enforce and prosecute that code because it has such a small provision of what's allowed, and it doesn't really have a lot of the specifics. So, but as far as the number of cities, I don't have that information. I could certainly gather that up, though.
I think I may know the answer to that. I believe Blaine County and I think also Sandpoint, as I was researching, I think they also
I would be really interested in soliciting the support from Chubbuck and from Bannock County so that we're not an island unto ourselves with an ordinance like this.
We have to put a sign right at the diamond of death.
Yeah, there you go.
Right in the middle of it.
I should note and make it known publicly again that a lot of the language in this draft ordinance did come from the Idaho Falls ordinance. They did a really good job. I think we changed a few things and made it a little better in my opinion, but I have to give them credit for passing a very good ordinance recently.
See, I'd be very interested in knowing what has happened in other municipalities in terms of the enforcement. You know, I know our officers are busy. Is it possible to know how it's happened, how this has been enforced in other areas, and whether it's been too much of a burden on our police?
My guess would be that policemen would much rather write a ticket for this than to write a ticket for having an accident.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's historically that when citations are higher for violations of the law, accidents are down. So this is something that is in our society and everybody has. So the way we look at it is as an ounce of prevention is going to cause, create a lot more prevention. If we have prevented on one end, then we're going to stop the accidents, responding to accidents. It could really help us out in the long run. If an officer's driving down the street, sees that, they can pull them over. And the other thing that we talked about too is a buffer period to not go out and just start writing citations right off the bat, but do like a 6-month or a year-long where we do warnings and do some public education and training and things like that to the public so that they understand what the new ordinance does say, and we'd be able to provide people with education on that as we make the traffic stop. So.
And I would think our news media, the TV, newspaper, everyone would want to cooperate and help us to publicize this so that we can have the result that we're looking for.
You can even tweet it.
Really?
My understanding, Idaho Falls put a year in before their ordinance actually goes into effect.
Really?
Do we know if the state has even considered anything like this? I know a few years ago they looked at the texting and driving, texting and driving. I know there's other states that have statutes that prevent people from using their cell phone as they're driving, that it must be hands-free. Has the state, do we know of any legislation that they may be considering? Has it even been brought up?
The answer is yes, they did look at it, but they did not ultimately do anything about it yet.
Yeah, I don't have any information on that, so.
I think eventually it's going to be something they will have to address because as you see accidents that do happen, fairly bad accidents that do happen. That's usually what creates things like this, and we would like to prevent that within our city, and especially with young drivers out there that don't have a lot of experience on the road and messing with their cell phones and things like that too. We could start actually at the schools with our school resource officers for training and prevention. So,
Are those citations you've listed on the screen, are those all after accidents?
no, they're not. They're where somebody was issued an inattentive driving citation, and it's just off the inattentive driving, the number she was able to pull, that the cell phone was related to the inattentive driving citations. That's why I'm saying that these numbers are probably low, because we really haven't been tracking if a cell phone, there's no like standardized tracking for cell phone usage because this hasn't been an ordinance. The officers have just been noting it in their notes. So that's why I'm saying this number is low. That would be a complete data I'd have to pull on accidents that were related to that, and I don't know. I don't have any answer for that.
Question. What would be the recommended amount for the infraction from your perspective?
My perspective is really it could be graduated for the first 3 before it becomes a misdemeanor, or it could just be a set amount of anywhere from $25 to $250. It's ultimately up to council. The non-moving violations in Idaho code under the traffic code are anywhere from $60 to $80 typically, and speeding tickets, those types of moving violations, again, $80 to $190. So I think you want to be in that range.
range.
What's that?
In that 60 to 80 range.
It's a
then?
possibility, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think the number on the bottom right, 25.26%, 72 is probably closer to 30-some% of 213. It's roughly a third. So I would just say it's probably a third.
I think it's probably safe to say that. And at a minimum.
At a minimum.
Yeah.
So a third of the distracted driving is due to cell phone operation.
Yeah. It's huge, especially just driving around. Chief and I were driving around the other day, and we pulled to a lady who's messing around on her cell phone. We rolled down the window, and she was very apologetic, and we were at a stoplight, and we watched her driving down the road.
I saw at an intersection a person using a cell phone, smoking a cigarette with a Coke in the hand with the cigarette, and trying to operate a stick shift. So that's how bad
it's multitasking.
Yeah.
And when you look
gotta use a clutch.
When you look at driving, it's you're behind the wheel of a 2,000-pound vehicle, and if we could prevent some of these accidents from happening, or somebody drifting off the roadway, or a deer running out in front of your car on Bannock Highway.
Yeah. Would this include bicyclists?
No.
Okay, because I've seen people on bicycles using cell phones. I saw one Yellowstone.
Have you ever tried it?
I'm not gonna try it.
You should try it. That's tough to text and ride a bicycle
But
at the
I'm
same
thinking
time.
that, that's the case where if they're distracted on a bicycle, somebody hits them.
Sure. And our whole emphasis between Jared and my conversation is public safety on this, and that's what
Well, probably if we were all honest, we are guilty of this, but we need to face the music.
I have a sink. I like using my sink in my car. That's my preferred. I hit that hands-free and talk on my speakers.
It's easy. Okay, Count.
One question, and probably for you, Jared. So we got one email from a small business owner or manager asking us to take into account businesses, and I think that person was bail bonds, but similar type businesses where they're in their car and they have to respond immediately or they lose business. But the hands-free would allow for that, right? So that, we're not doing something that is not allowing them.
They still can keep, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, they can talk on the phone. They
Right.
just can't have the phone up here while they're trying to drive. That's why your hands-free, and every other person you run into, either their vehicle has the Bluetooth capability, or they have the little thing on their ear.
Or hands-free headphones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the capability is there, and it's not an expensive way to do it. You
Because
just
I
have
think
to do it.
there was maybe my understanding is that email was thinking that hands-free was not allowed. Is that?
I would like to be clear, though, if you're Bell's Bonds or something, you have a company that may be responding to something, doesn't give you you're not a police officer that's running down the road that's got to be talking, or you're not a utility that there's...
It's not an emergency.
It's not an emergency.
Right.
So,
and they're just worried about their business, but, and I understand that. But yes, they're not emergency personnel that have that need that you would have. But I was thinking that was a misunderstanding anyway, because they can use a hands-free device, right?
Yep.
So we're not putting people out of business by having this. It's,
Jared, sorry, we interrupted you like 15 times right there.
It's all right. No, you've covered what I was going to say. Basically, every business person thinks their business is the most important, and it is to them. And we're not interfering with business, I don't believe, because we're not excluding the ability to use that device. We're just saying that it has to be done in a hands-free mode.
Ideally, I would like to see this as a state law, but in the absence of that, I think it's very important for us to consider public safety. And so I would like to make a motion that we instruct staff to proceed with this ordinance, and also a resolution setting the infraction amount of $80, and that we do the temporary ordinance for 3 years.
Second.
Okay.
Second that. Is there a phase into it?
I think that I would say we could give that discretion to the police department, and that if they want to do an education period where they're going to give people warnings, that we would allow them to do that. And we would let them determine when that time frame would be appropriate.
I would say this be the heavies in this instead of making the police department, because whenever it comes in, somebody's going to feel it's arbitrary. And since we're the ones that really have to make the decision, I would say 6 months.
I'm fine with adding that to the motion, a 6-month warning period if that's...
And then the police department's not arbitrarily bad guys.
Okay.
So council, just so I'm clear, I can write into the ordinance that the ordinance will be effective upon publication but not be enforced until 6 months after that date. Is that what I'm hearing?
Ordinance or a resolution?
The ordinance, which will have an accompanying resolution setting the fine amount.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I think $80 is too much for a first offense.
Okay.
What would you suggest?
I think it needs to be smaller and be progressive. Maybe 25, 50, and 80, or 75 or something.
Council, if I may, and I did talk about graduated sanctions, the problem with that becomes after that 2-year period lapses where they're no longer eligible to have that fourth become a misdemeanor. Would that start the graduated sanctions over at that point, or would they always be able to look back as far as the first, second, and third? An easier route might be to just find a happy median on the fine amount for any violation that's classified as an infraction. I can make either work in the code, but I just like it to be as clear as possible, not only for the officers enforcing it, but for the public to understand as well what's expected of them.
Well, and sometimes you gotta have enough teeth to it that makes it worthwhile to observe the law.
Yeah, if it's too low, then...
I had an uncle that, he's long gone, but he had his big automobile, and he said it was cheaper to get tickets than it was to fly.
People get upset about it.
And I just think that
When they come in,
there's
they'll
people
pay
that will
it.
see that it's cheaper to pay the ticket than it is to comply.
And one of the issues with the graduated too is that the officers on the street, they're going to have to look into their computer to see if somebody was convicted of it or if it was dismissed or not. And if it's a first, second, or third, that could lead to a little bit of confusion out on the street. So.
I know that, and Major Shai knows that too, because there are some state laws that have that graduated procedure, and it does create a lot of turmoil throughout the whole process. Yeah.
So absent a graduated thing, what would be a good number, do you think?
I just think 80 is too high. I'm not sure where I would want it to be.
You split the baby in half at 40?
Let's put it at 60.
I'd still say that's too
Well, that, over the course, if you did 25, 50, and 75, you're 240, 140. 60 times 3 is 180.
We have a motion on the floor. The motion is instruct staff to prepare an ordinance and a resolution with a fee of $80. We have a motion and a second. We can always vote that down and argue the cost of that if you want to and do it again, or we can pass it that way.
Well, I think we have to decide if we want people to take it seriously or we don't want them to take it seriously. So if we don't want them to do it, they don't have to pay 80 if they don't do it.
It's probably like Chris said about the card key getting in. He says, once you have to face the music, you don't forget it again.
Yeah.
So.
It has to have teeth, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree with Rick. 80 might be a little bit steep. I don't know what the number is, quite frankly, but maybe it isn't steep. I can concede to that too. I don't.
60.
Well, it's just,
I know it's expensive to speed. People still do it. So.
One minor point of clarification, this will be a fine, not a fee. If it were a new fee, we would have to go through that whole process, including a public hearing. This is not a service we're providing, this is a penalty. So it's definitely a fine.
A fine, it's a fine.
some of the Bluetooth people might think it's a service.
Okay, do we...
And an implementation period of 6 months.
Do you, oh yeah, an implementation of 6 months was also, well, that actually wasn't part of the motion, unless the motion...
Well, you said you were okay with that, right?
I didn't hear her say she was okay with that. So.
Is that a problem for the police department to have any kind of stipulation that we give, or is that better for you?
No, it's we're good either way. We're used to being the heavy, so... But if you guys want to be the heavy, we'll let you. So
I think
be the heavy anyway.
I think if they know it's going to be coming in before school's out is an important factor of this.
Sure.
If it's implemented after school's out, it gets lost a little bit.
Well, we can also, when the new school year does come into play, we can
be back with
do some big media blitzes with it and education that way. So
does a 6 month limit your ability to use some discretion?
No, we can still stop for it, but we can't cite for it.
No,
am I correct on that? Or?
No, the primary reason for the stop is part of the ordinance. So if the ordinance has a 6 month phase-in, you wouldn't be able to stop for it. My thought is, council, if it's important enough to pass, it's as important now as it is in 6 months.
Okay, then let's not amend.
I don't try to take an opinion on things, but to give you some of my perspective, I think that as he said, they're always going to be the heavy. They're the ones that are making the stop and enforcing the law. So you would have some issues with the ability to stop during that 6 month. You just wouldn't be able to do it. I don't think you should phase in part of the ordinance. It's either all or nothing. And like I say, I think if it's important to pass, it's important to implement.
I think the important piece there, though, is the police department the police officers have the ability to use some discretion on, if I pulled this person over 5 different times because of this same violation, you don't want a 6 month period to go, okay, well, you have still 5 more months to figure it out.
Right.
But there is the education factor that should
But
go.
they can still, if
Yeah,
it's
I think they
reasonable,
can
say to somebody,
educate.
hey, did you know this was, oh, I
Okay.
didn't, okay, here's your warning, but if they're a repeat offender, then.
I would like the ability to have them to be able to stop and say, hey, just so you know, we do have a hands-free ordinance. We're not issuing citations on it right now, but we will be in 5 months.
Yeah, but you need the ability to stop
Sure.
as part of that education
Yeah,
process, or
that's
else
true.
they'll be back where we are right now without.
That's true.
Yeah.
So no 6 months.
Yeah, so we won't include that part in the motion, then we won't include the 6 months.
Will not include the 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion, council?
Just a quick question, do we know what the fine amount is in Idaho Falls?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't know that they've passed the ordinance. When they passed the ordinance, they did not at the same time pass a resolution from what I looked at. And so that might still be pending, but they might have already done it. I don't watch them closely. I have enough to do here watching you
But we
guys.
could still proceed with the motion to have you prepare that, and if we learn in the meantime that $80 is an unreasonable amount based on what other places are doing, we could always change
We can
it
amend
or
the
amend our
resolution that night,
resolution
can't
at
we?
that time.
How long will it take you to do this to get it enacted? Will it be a month? Will it be,
I could have it prepared for the first council meeting in December.
would that give you the time to find out what they're doing and what the recommendation on the resolution?
As far as what Idaho Falls is doing?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. That's a quick phone call to see if they've taken that step yet.
What if you remove the $80 from it and we can have it
And
on the
just say whatever,
resolution?
yeah.
Well, on a resolution, that way we can have, we'll have an opportunity at our liaison, council liaison work session clarification meeting to have some further discussion on what a proper fine would be. and
So we do a
stuff.
separate resolution?
So, well, right now, the motion still has $80 in it. I'm just wondering if you want to, if you would want to remove it and see what it is, if that's a point of contention. If it's not, then I'd leave the motion as is and go from there.
We got two things, we got an ordinance and a resolution, right?
Yes.
The ordinance simply makes this against the law. The resolution sets the fine.
Yes.
So all we need to do today is set the ordinance and worry about a resolution later, right?
Except that the ordinance will be important to pass, or the resolution will be important to pass with the ordinance. So that we have that knowledge of what the penalty is.
But do you need that decision today?
No.
The dollar amount
But we
doesn't
need to
need to
have the
be
resolution
today.
prepared to be that first week of December at the same
Do that
time.
after we get a little more information.
Yeah.
Do we have to have a public hearing for a resolution? I don't think so.
An ordinance
And
we
so
do.
the resolution.
Not this type of ordinance.
And the resolution could be amended at the voting time down, couldn't it?
Well, ultimately, what would be on the agenda is a resolution setting the fine for the ordinance. The amount of the fine, it would be best to notice that up beforehand with the proper notice requirements, but it certainly is not a decision that has to be made today. But my preference would be that it be finalized at that next meeting. I won't try to say the whole thing myself.
Yeah, good luck.
I can if I think about it for a second. So
Okay, so-
the motion may, and you may want to just say the motion is to prepare the resolution, leaving the fine amount open, and prepare the ordinance for passage, but it's entirely up to you guys.
But if we do it this way with 80 in it, then that's what goes out in the notice to the public, so they can come and comment, and we could still change it on that December 1st meeting?
Well, again, this is not a fee, so there's no requirement for a public hearing.
Okay, but there will be on the ordinance?
No.
No.
Oh, there's not?
No. It's always an option.
Okay.
Council always has the option to do that, but there are only certain ordinances that require public hearing, and this is not one of them.
Would a public hearing allow us to start our education?
Certainly.
Just a question, I don't know.
I would recommend, and because we do have a motion on the floor, I would recommend amending that motion. I would entertain amending that motion and splitting it up in prepare an ordinance, one motion to prepare the ordinance, vote on that. The second motion to prepare a resolution to come with the ordinance that is prepared with a fine to be yet determined
I can support
in the
that.
future.
Okay, I'll
Does that
retract my
make
motion
sense?
and I'll make a new motion
Okay,
that
so you're
we,
gonna withdraw your
yep, I'll
original
withdraw the
motion?
original motion and make a new motion that we instruct staff to proceed with the ordinance, a temporary ordinance for a period of 3 years.
I second.
Okay. Thank you.
Second.
We've got a second, motion by Adamson, a second by Lurick. Ruth, could you please call the roll?
A temporary ordinance for a 3-year period.
A period of 3 years, yeah.
I will, sir, in just a second. Adamson,
Yes.
Lurick,
Yes.
Gray,
Yes.
Cheatham,
Yes.
Johnston.
Yes.
Thank you. Now I would also entertain a motion, if so desired, for a resolution to come at the same meeting as the ordinance.
I so move.
Okay?
Second.
So we have a motion to bring an ordinance forward from Johnston.
Resolution.
A resolution, not an ordinance, yeah. We have a motion to bring a resolution forward at the same meeting as the ordinance will come forward, is made by Johnston and seconded by Lurick. Soon as you are ready, do we need any discussion?
And
What
the
about-
amount of the fine will be determined.
Will be determined. As soon as you're ready, Ruth, if you'd call the roll.
Yes, sir. Johnston?
Yes.
Lurick,
Yes.
Adamson?
Yes.
Gray,
Yes.
Cheatham.
Yes.
Super, thank you. We will invite you to that meeting on liaison, city council liaison study session, whatever it's called. I'm never going to get that down. That meeting next week.
I'll be there, Mayor.
So that you'll have a little bit more direction on what that.
And
would
just
look
for
like.
the council's awareness, what I will prepare is an ordinance that has to be reviewed on or before January 1st, 3 years hence, so that we don't have to worry about exact publication date and those types of things.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you very much for your work, council. With that, we are adjourned.